Hey there, curious minds. Tonight we're diving deep into the dusty folds of a Mongol saddlebag, because that, my friend, is where survival starts when you're galloping across the open steppe with no pit stops, no stores, and definitely no mobile signal. The wind slaps your face like it's trying to make a point, and your horse snorts as it churns through the brittle grass of Central Asia. The year is somewhere in the 1200s, specific enough for bedtime, and you're part of one of the most mobile and feared fighting forces in history. You feel the creak of leather under your thighs, the rumble of hoofbeats through your bones, and the quiet sense that you've forgotten something important like an extra pair of socks. Spoiler, you didn't pack socks at all. Quick favor, before you dive into full-on relaxation mode, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more than you know. And I genuinely appreciate it if you do. If not, no worries, I'm just glad you're here. Post your city and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where and when you're tuning in from. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Let's take a moment to leave the noise of the day behind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach for your saddlebag with one gloved hand, still damp from yesterday's melted frost, and begin to unpack what will keep you alive, warm, fed, and maybe not miserable for the next 7 days. The saddlebag itself is not exactly a backpack. It's a 2-pouch leather contraption slung over the back of your sturdy Mongol pony with a cross-lash of cords that dig lightly into its flank. The pouches are waxed and stiff, the seams reinforced with tendon thread that creaks faintly as you open them. Inside, everything is ordered not by convenience but by necessity. The most important items are packed at the top, not because they are more sacred, but because the bottom of the bag gets wet with horse sweat. At the very top, a tightly rolled strip of dried sheep intestine. Don't flinch, it's not food yet. It's your emergency cord, a multipurpose lifesaver that could serve as a bowstring, tourniquet, or fire starter. Below that, your flint pouch, small and wrapped in goat hide. You rub your fingers over its familiar roughness and feel the tiny sparks of imaginary fire in your brain. Somewhere in the lower fold of the bag, beneath a compact felt bundle that doubles as both pillow and bandage roll, you find your wrapped map. Or rather, the Mongol version of one. It's not paper, it's a thin sheet of birch bark, etched lightly with scratches, dots, and lines that only you and maybe your squad mates can interpret. Historians still argue whether these markings served as true cartographic tools or memory prompts, but either way, you trust it more than your instincts. There's a surprising amount of food in your saddlebag, all things considered. Not neatly organized, of course, crumbs have colonized every corner and something in there smells like regret but functional. You've packed dried mutton jerky called borts, which you chew on until it softens into something vaguely edible. There's a pouch of hardened cheese curds, our rule, which rattle like pebbles and taste like sour nostalgia. Both are astonishingly lightweight. Because water is heavy and you are not carrying more than one flask, 2 if you're optimistic and have a compliant second horse. That flask, let's talk about it. It's not water, at least not entirely. It's a leather skin filled with Arag fermented mare's milk. The taste is polarizing. Imagine yogurt with a splash of beer and a whisper of horse barn and you're getting close. But it's full of fat and warmth, and when the night bites hard, you sip it like it's liquid courage. Some say it helps the stomach settle, others say it guarantees it won't. Hidden in a side slit of the bag is a tightly folded prayer flag, blue silk, frayed at the edges. You don't touch it unless you need to, but it's there. A whisper to the eternal blue sky, the divine force you suspect is watching your every move and judging your saddle organization quite harshly. You also keep a small, carved wooden figurine, a household god or ancestor charm, tucked in a piece of old wool. Some say these bring luck, but really they bring memory. Of home. Of stories, of nights that didn't start with frostbite. You shift the weight of the saddlebag now and then because balance is survival. One lopsided turn could tire your horse, and a tired horse means a tired you, and a tired you means someone's definitely catching an arrow with their face. So you keep adjusting, redistributing, listening for the flap of something unsecured. Once you rode 20 miles with your shaving knife clinking against your fire pot. And the sound still haunts your dreams. Your pouch of fire tools, by the way, is packed with the solemnity of a priest's kit. Flint, dry moss, and a few tiny slivers of animal fat wax for tinder. Mongols use dung for fire fuel. It's dry, it's abundant, and it burns surprisingly well once you get over the olfactory part. You've got a stash of it balled up in a sack made from the stomach of a goat. Not glamorous, but nothing out here is. Your knife is the most personal thing in the pack. It's not part of your weaponry, it's a utility blade used for skinning, carving, whittling, and if necessary, cutting yourself free from things you didn't see coming. The handle is bone, smooth from years of use. You sharpen it with a flat whetstone tucked into the seam of your bag, wrapped in old cloth that smells faintly of sheep and steel. One small leather pouch contains dried herbs, some for tea, some for wounds, and some for other things. A bitter root called zostera that you chew when your gut protests too much arag. A pinch of ground lichen to rub into saddle sores. A dried sprig of something your grandmother claimed kept ghosts away, though it mostly just attracts curious marmots. Tucked inside a flap you stitched yourself is a thread-and needle kit made from porcupine quills and tendon thread. You don't so much, but when you do, it's urgent. A torn boot strap, a ripped underarm seam, a saddle bag gash that risks spilling your lunch all over the steps. This kit is a lifeline. You've learned the hard way that even the smallest hole in your gear becomes an invitation to cold, to dirt, to infection. And at the very bottom of the saddlebag, in a hard waxed pouch, you keep something you've never told anyone about. It's a fragment of pottery, useless, cracked, and smooth with age. You found it on a riverbank weeks ago, and something about it felt old, older than even your people's migration stories. You don't know why you keep it, but you do. Maybe to remember, maybe to imagine. Historians still argue whether Mongol warriors carried sentimental items, but the truth is you're human before you're cavalry. As you cinch your saddlebag closed again, the evening breeze sharpens and you glance toward the horizon. Another day's ride waits, and everything you need is now back in place, just as it was, just as it always has been. A compact, lived-in chaos of bone, milk, felt, and fire, ready to carry you through whatever tomorrow hurls across the grasslands. You unhook the rations pouch first, tied snug beneath the saddlebag with a simple knot you can undo in the dark, which you often do. This little leather satchel is the difference between strength and starvation, and you've learned to pack it like a puzzle. You crack it open, and the scent of old fat, sour milk, and sun-cured meat escapes like a memory with teeth. Mongol food, if you can call it that, is designed for durability, not delicacy. And for the next 7 days, you're about to appreciate that distinction in intimate, sometimes uncomfortable detail. Your first and most reliable companion is borts, sun-dried mutton sliced so thin it looks like curled parchment. You chew it slowly, letting your mouth do what time and fire usually do in a kitchen. It starts off like leather and ends up like protein, and while it won't win any awards, it keeps your legs strong and your mind sharper than your knife. You can boil it if you have time, but most days you're riding too hard to bother. When soaked in water, it rehydrates into something resembling stew, but let's be honest, it still tastes like jerky's cranky older brother. Next to the borts, wrapped in a scrap of linen that used to be someone's shirt, you find your stash of arul, the Mongol cheese curd that doubles as both snack and dental challenge. It's hard, tangy, and loud. Seriously, you could hear someone chewing it from 100 yards away, which probably makes it terrible for stealth. But it's packed with calcium and fat, and once you get past the sharp taste, it grows on you, kind of like a toothache. Some curds are flavored with herbs, others are just sour enough to make your eyes twitch. Historians still argue whether the different types of arul denoted rank, region, or simply goat temperament. You dig deeper into the pouch and pull out your flask, heavy, leathery, and slick with condensation from the morning chill. You take a cautious sip and your mouth floods with the unmistakable punch of arag, fermented mare's milk. It fizzes slightly and you try not to wince. This stuff is an acquired taste, and you've acquired it only because there's no alternative. You remind yourself it's rich in vitamins, good for your gut, allegedly, and fermented enough to take the edge off a bad day or a cold night, or both at once. If you're lucky, it won't separate into curds and liquid until day 5. If you're unlucky, it'll surprise you by exploding in your pouch mid-gallop. Beside the flask is a pouch of tsagon-itty white foods, mostly made from dairy and shaped into odd little sculptures that look like edible fossils. Some are soft and crumbly, others as tough as horn. You have a few cubes of dried yogurt that dissolve slowly under your tongue like chalk with aspirations. One little lump smells faintly of onion, and you debate whether it's meant to. Mongols believed in the sacredness of milk, the purest food connected to life, spirits, and sky. You believe it mostly just sticks to your molars. And there at the bottom, in a cloth pouch sealed with wax, is the prize: rendered mutton fat mixed with dried wild onions and pressed into small, greasy cakes. These are your calorie bombs, your fuel blocks, your end-of-the-day morale lifters. You bite into one and feel the instant surge of warmth, not just in your body but in your mood. You ration them carefully because they spoil if left out, and if you eat more than 2 in a day, you'll be riding with regrets. A small waxed pouch tied with blue string holds dried juniper berries and crushed rhubarb root. This isn't just trail mix, it's your emergency gut fix. If you eat something questionable, like that half-frozen goat kidney you were gifted last week, these berries help calm the storm. Mongol riders learned early on that a moving stomach is a dangerous thing. A bout of steppe sickness during a charge, that's how you become someone's footnote in a battle song. Another pouch holds salt, simple, crystalline, and crucial. You sprinkle it into boiling water to create broth, rub it on meat to preserve it, and toss it onto small wounds if you're feeling bold or self-destructive. You once saw an old Arban leader pack salt under his tongue for hours during a ride, claimed it kept his blood sharp. You tried it once. It mostly kept your mouth dry and your mood worse. And yes, there's something sweet, barely. A strip of dried wild apple skin shriveled to near invisibility. You chew it when you're missing home, when the cold creeps too deep into your bones, or when you just need to remember that taste exists outside of sour and fat. It doesn't do much nutritionally, but it does remind you that fruit once grew somewhere. Historians still argue whether Mongols had access to sweets regularly or if these were rare, luxury items traded from the south. Wrapped tightly in horsehair twine is your emergency protein stash, dried blood cakes. You can crush them into broth, mix them with snow, or just gnaw on them when the mood gets truly dire. They taste like metallic earth and old promises, but they work. They get you up when everything says stay down. The recipe varies from tribe to tribe, but most involve boiling blood with barley flour until it forms a paste, then drying it into dense little slabs that clang when dropped. You don't drop them, they're too valuable. You also carry a small cloth pouch of tarag powder, fermented yogurt dried into a powder you can stir into hot water. When you've got the time, this becomes your comfort food, like the Steppe's version of tea and cookies. Thick, slightly tangy, and just enough to remind you of hearth smoke and laughter. Near the edge of the bag, you find a crumpled piece of bark with something smeared on it, dried wild honey collected during last summer's expedition near a beekeeping village. You've saved this for a special occasion but haven't quite decided what that is. Maybe your birthday, maybe not freezing to death, maybe just tonight when the stars come out and the horses stop shivering. You also tuck in small pouches of tea, brick tea from the Tangut or Uyghur markets. It's strong, bitter, and steeps forever, but you grind a bit and drop it into boiling water with a sliver of fat, and suddenly you've got Mongol-style butter tea. Not everyone likes it, you don't always like it, but it warms your belly in a way Arag never quite manages. And finally, at the very bottom of the pouch, always hidden, is the tiny stash of barter snacks. A strip of dried fish, a cube of rock sugar, a folded piece of almond cake wrapped in silk. You don't eat these are for trade, for charm, for last resort diplomacy. When you ride into a stranger's camp and you need their help, or at least their patience, you offer them a bite of something from your stash. It's the difference between sleeping by the fire and sleeping under it. As you cinch the pouch closed again and secure it under your saddle, you pat it gently like a friend, because that's what it is. A friend that stinks, leaks, and weighs far too much, but also keeps you alive. And in the vast cold of the steppe, that's about as much love as anything can offer. You lean down from the saddle and unlatch the leather side roll strapped beside your stirrup, where the fire-starting kit lives, neither glamorous nor flashy, but undeniably sacred. Because out here, with winds sharp enough to flay skin and nights that drop below freezing before the sun's even down, fire is more than warmth. It's survival, it's morale. It's the closest thing to magic you can summon with your bare hands. Inside the kit are the essentials: a hardened steel striker, a rough chunk of flint, and a roll of charcloth packed inside an oiled leather pouch that smells vaguely like regret and goat fat. You thumb the flint, cold and jagged, chipped just right to shave sparks with the striker. You've used this exact kit through storms, dust, snow. And that one week you tried to dry out in the go-by and ended up smoking more sand than meat. And yet, somehow, it still works. You kneel by a small hollow in the ground, shielded from the wind by your body and your saddlebags. You place a wisp of dry grass into a circle of scraped dung and tiny twigs, because on the steppe, firewood is whatever doesn't walk away when you reach for it. Sheep dung burns slow and steady, and once it catches, it's stubborn. The trick, of course, is getting it to catch. That's where the charcloth earns its keep, blackened linen that takes the spark and glows like an ember whispering its first breath. You strike the steel hard against the flint and sparks leap, flash, and vanish until one lands just right. The charcloth flares to life with the faintest curl of orange. You blow gently, a little more, and just like that, fire begins. You feed it carefully, twigs, grass, dung, and soon you've got a cook flame, flickering low and hot. Like a secret shared between you and the land. You pull out your tiny cookpot, dented from 3 battles and a disastrous marmot experiment, and fill it with water from your skin. Drop in a strip of borts, a pinch of salt, a dried blood cake, and a few juniper berries for luck. You stir with the end of your knife and settle back. Dinner will take as long as the fire says it will. Historians still argue whether Mongols carried their own fuel across long distances, or whether they simply scavenged and adapted with whatever they found. In truth, the answer's both, because if you don't adapt, you don't last. You remember once riding with a scout who hoarded dried moss in his helmet, convinced it burned hotter. He was half right, it also made his helmet smell like swamp porridge, but he never froze, so who's laughing now? Tucked beside your fire kit is a precious rarity, a small packet of tinder fungus. Scraped from birch trees along the Orkhon River, it catches sparks faster than charcloth and keeps them longer, like a living ember. You only use it on the worst days when your fingers are numb and your patience is gone. Today you save it. You always save it. Next to the tinder, wrapped in a square of lambskin, is your flammable insurance, a ball of dried fat and sheep's wool, soaked in grease and pressed into a tight wad. You light this when you need fire now, not later. Once ignited, it'll burn through a snow squall. Mongol mothers teach their sons to make them by the time they are 10. It's a life skill right up there with riding, wrestling, and not losing your horse in a blizzard. You also carry a twig of pine sap hardened into a sticky amber knot. You can shave pieces off into a flame to keep it burning longer or rub it on frayed bowstrings or cracked leather for an emergency seal. In a pinch, you've even chewed it, mostly out of boredom, but it's got this bittersweet medicinal sting that reminds you of mountain air and your grandmother's herbal rants. Alongside the striker and flint is a bone-handled all you use to dig tiny fire pits when the wind's especially cruel. You've shaped fire hollows in sand, snow, gravel, even that one time in a yak dung pile when no one else had the guts to try it. Fire doesn't care where it starts, it just wants to live. There's also a pouch of resin-laced twigs from a cedar grove you passed months ago. You'd gathered them like treasure because cedar burns slow and fragrant. And you swear the smoke calms horses, or maybe it just calms you. Either way, when the night presses in too close, you light a cedar twig and breathe deep. It's like dragging a little bit of home across the steppe, behind your saddle and under the stars. You remember once sitting with an old archer whose left hand had frozen stiff during a campaign in winter. He taught you the secret to building a fire in ice. Start with 2 stones heated by the sun. Build your fire atop them and insulate with bark. It sounded ridiculous until it saved your foot. You've done stranger things since, but that fire still burned truer than most people you've known. You don't bother carrying flammable liquids, too risky, too heavy. Instead, you rely on what the land offers: tinder from horsetails, fuzz from reeds, even shredded parchment from the prayer scroll you tore during a lightning storm you swore the gods would understand. Fire, to you, isn't just survival, it's ritual. You light it with the same rhythm every night, murmuring a line your uncle taught you: flame eats cold before cold eats us. You never asked where it came from. Maybe it's a saying, maybe it's a warning. Either way, you whisper it every time just to be safe. Your flint is duller now than it was a year ago, the steel strikers notched from overuse, and you're down to half a pouch of dung crumbs and cedar bark. But somehow every night the fire still answers when you call. It crackles like a lullaby and spits like an insult, and it warms your face while the stars stare down cold and uncaring. And when it's time to move, you scatter the ashes, smother the coals, and pack the kit again, tight, dry, and ready, because the next fire might be hours away or it might be your last. And until then, you carry it with you, in your pouch, in your bones, and always, always in your plans. You reach behind your saddle for the bundle of wool and leather that carries what little comfort you allow yourself, your bedroll, if you can even call it that. It's tightly wound, lashed with rawhide cord, and bears the smoky scent of old campfires and unwashed dreams. When you untie it, it flumps open like a tired sigh, revealing the few soft things a steppe warrior owns. First, there's the felted wool sleeping mat. Made from thick layers of sheep's wool pressed and pounded into submission until they form something between a mattress and a punishment. It isn't soft exactly, but it insulates you from the frozen earth beneath like a charm. You've lain on it in the middle of snowstorms and under desert moons, and while your back protests every morning, your bones still function. That's a win. Rolled inside the mat is your sleeping robe, a heavy deal thicker than your riding coat, lined with rabbit fur and the kind of stains that tell stories without words. It's patched under the arm with an old bit of silk. Dyed purple once upon a time, that patch is a keepsake from a caravan guard you shared fire with 2 winters ago who believed purple warded off wolves. You've been wearing it ever since, and so far, no wolves. Coincidence? Maybe, but you're not taking it off. Historians still argue whether Mongols used bedrolls like this for nightly stops or only during extended campaigns. Truth is, you use what you have when you can, on a calm night. You might even stack grass under your mat. On a bad one, you sleep in the saddle, head down like a bird clinging to a branch. You always unroll your mat facing east. It's not a rule, more of a habit. Maybe a whisper from your grandmother who said the sun should always see your face before your shadow. You think about that sometimes, wrapped in your robe, watching the stars grind across the sky like ancient teeth. Inside the bedroll pouch is a square of felt you use as a pillow. Sometimes you stuff it with your spare tunic. Sometimes with dry grass, and sometimes, not often, you fold it over your hands and just cry into it because the wind's too cruel and the silence too wide. No one tells you that part about the steppe. Tucked beside the felt is your backup pair of socks, hand-stitched, high-drapped, and smelling faintly of horse sweat and stale vinegar. They're your night socks, your sacred socks. You only wear them when your feet are frozen and your soul's considering a transfer to a warmer body. They don't look like much, but they've walked you through frozen rivers and across coals once accidentally, and they survived. In a separate felt pouch tied with sinew string is your sleep talisman. It's a tiny carved bone figure, shaped like a woman with no face and long arms that curl inward. You've had it since childhood, gifted by a cousin who said she keeps dreams quiet and bears warm. You believe it, even though you've never seen a bear warm. Still, you place it beside your bed every night, just outside the mat. She watches, you sleep. There's also a fire-warmed stone wrapped in hide you place at your feet on particularly icy nights. It doesn't stay hot for long, but the first 10 minutes feel like heaven leaking into your toes. Sometimes, when there's no stone handy, you use a saddlebag stuffed with manure, and yes, you know how that sounds, but warm is warm. One item you guard like treasure is the silk scarf folded into the bedroll lining, dyed blue with silver stitching along the edge. It belonged to your mother, or so your father said. You don't remember her, but you sleep with the scarf under your cheek every night, and when you do, the wind doesn't howl quite so loud. On the rare nights you can afford it, you sprinkle crushed juniper leaves into your pillow felt. The smell reminds you of high summer and horses grazing without saddles. You once heard a shaman say that juniper drives away bad spirits and worse memories. You don't know if that's true, but it certainly smells better than your socks. For warmth, you wrap yourself in the riding cloak you wear by day, oilcloth on the outside, fur on the inside, stitched to fold tight at the neck and loose at the feet. It traps heat like a cocoon. One of your fellow riders calls it your second skin, mostly because you smell like it now. You laughed the first time, you didn't the fifth. Every fifth night or so, if it hasn't snowed and the winds aren't plotting your murder, you lay out your whole bedroll under open sky, cloak pulled up to your chin, sword resting beside your knee, and just stare upward. The stars don't twinkle here, they stare, cold and clear and impossibly sharp. It makes you feel like a single blade of grass in a very large and impatient pasture. You've added one final detail over the years, a thin strip of hide, tied around your wrist before sleep. A simple loop, you connect it to your horse's tether line, so if something spooks your mount and it bolts, it tugs your arm and yanks you awake before you're left behind. Has it worked? Yes. Has it dislocated your shoulder? Also yes. And while some nights are peaceful, wrapped in rabbit fur and dreams that smell faintly of milk and firewood, other nights you barely sleep at all. Every crackle in the grass, every cough of wind across the rocks sends a shiver up your spine, but that's part of the job. Comfort is a gift, paranoia is policy. Still, even when you're bone-tired and stink of smoke and regret, there's a strange comfort to this rolled-up bundle of cloth, hair, and history. It's not a bed by palace standards, but it's yours, it smells like you, and when the wind is right and the fire hasn't died and your socks are warm, it's enough. You close your eyes with your hand on your sword hilt, your feet wrapped in felt. And your dreams guarded by a faceless bone woman with arms like moonlight. And for a few quiet hours you drift, not into sleep exactly, but into something close enough. You reach for the belly of your saddle where the leather pouch hangs low, tight-lashed and dusty with miles. This is your food pack, not the dried meat and fancy camp meals kind. This is the I need to eat while riding, fighting, or pretending to sleep kind. What a Mongol horseman packs to last a week on the steppe without boiling a single pot. At the heart of the pouch is borts, sun-dried strips of mutton, chopped thin, pounded thinner, and left in the wind until they're so dry you could shave with them. They snap like twigs when cold, chew like leather belts when warm, and taste exactly like sheep no matter what temperature. You break off 2 fingers' worth and tuck them into your cheek like some kind of warrior chipmunk. They'll soften as you ride, mixing with spit until they become a kind of meaty chewing gum. Not exactly gourmet, but then again, you haven't seen a tavern in weeks. Next to the borts is your second favorite essential, arul. That's the hard, white, dried curd that looks like someone dropped chalk in a milk bucket. It crumbles like stone, tastes like sour dreams, and somehow keeps you alive. You nibble it sparingly, letting the sharp tang buzz on your tongue. It's high in protein, low in joy, but it'll keep your bones from rattling loose in the cold. Historians still argue whether Mongol warriors truly relied on borts and arul as primary nourishment during full-scale invasions, or if this was a campaign myth polished by chroniclers in awe of their stamina. But here you are, alive and half-fed on sour milk rocks and meat shavings, proving at least part of the story true. You dig deeper into the pouch and find the dried blood cakes, brownish red and pressed flat like currency from the underworld. Made from sheep or yak blood mixed with barley flour and salt, then dried hard in the sun. They crumble into broth or chew down straight depending how hungry you are or how reckless. You usually mix them with hot water when you stop to cook. But more than once you've bitten into one raw, regretted it immediately, and done it again an hour later. In the far corner of the pouch is a bundle of dried wild onions and garlic, sliced thin, sun-cured, and tied with horsehair. You chew one when your mouth tastes like boot leather or when you want to keep conversation short. The smell is sharp enough to keep both spirits and certain overly friendly campmates away. Tucked in a small hide sleeve stitched into the pack's inner flap is a coin-sized disc of fermented mare's milk leather, air-dried arag reduced down to a chewy, sour strip that clings to your teeth like vengeance. You suck on one during long rides when the sun tries to bake your brain. The tangy flavor wakes you up while the sugar keeps your legs from shaking. It's not pleasant, but effective, like being slapped by a dairy ghost. There's also a tightly rolled pouch of fermented millet cakes, sour, crumbly, and made from the leftover mash scraped out of brewing pots. You picked up the habit from a caravan cook who claimed they'd keep your stomach busy and obedient. You're still not sure if he meant digestion or just distraction. Either way, they fill you up like a brick in a boot. You find your emergency snack bundle, a goat bladder tied tight with sinew and filled with roasted barley mixed with honey and dried rose hips. You only nibble it in the worst moments because once it's gone, it's gone. It tastes sweet and nutty and absolutely unlike the rest of your wartime cuisine. You made this one yourself back at a winter camp when everyone else was sharpening blades. You were hungry and creative. There's always a lump of salt tucked into the corner of the pouch. Big, gritty, and stolen from a southern trader 2 years ago. You shave bits off with your knife to add to soup, chew when dehydrated, or rub into wounds when you're feeling dramatic. Salt is currency, salt is health, salt is pain that reminds you you're still breathing. Wrapped in a stitched scrap of lambskin, you keep a few dried berries, not for energy. For morale, black currants if you're lucky. See buckthorn if you're cursed. You ration them like gold, popping one into your mouth during a long dusk ride or after a skirmish. The burst of sour sweet is enough to make you believe, briefly enjoy, and then there's your travel spoon. Carved bone, smoothed at the edges with your initials burned into the handle. You use it for everything, stirring, scooping, threatening camp thieves, and once very effectively for flipping hot stones during a cookfire bet. You never pack food without it. Losing it would feel more intimate than losing a boot. You keep a flask of coarse barley flour, too. You mix it with water when you need. Fast fuel or shake it into hot broth to thicken. In a pinch, you can eat it dry, just spooned into your mouth and chased with water until it turns into a gritty paste. It's not great, but you've eaten worse, much worse. And speaking of worse, you still carry a puck of horse blood jelly, pickled in salt and garlic, wrapped in waxed hide. It wobbles ominously, and you swear it's getting stronger with age. You save it for desperate days. So far, you've had 3. You hated all 3, but you survived. Each morning, you repack the pouch carefully. Heavy items on the bottom, soft ones near the top, and anything that leaks tied in its own scrap of goat wool. You check it the way a nobleman checks his coin purse, constantly, possessively, with a quiet dread of emptiness. One rider you once knew carried a roasted rat in his pouch for 3 weeks, swearing it was the snack of champions. He bit into it like an apple and laughed so hard he fell off his horse. You never tried it, but you still think about that laugh sometimes when dinner's running low and the wind smells like mice. The food pouch isn't pretty, it's not full of variety or comfort, but it's efficient, portable, and nearly indestructible. It'll keep you moving for a week or more, even if you don't stop once, and on this endless sea of grass and stone. That's the whole point, to keep moving, to keep eating. To stay just alive enough to see what tomorrow chews on next. You tug gently at the weathered flap of your smallest satchel, stitched from lambskin, oiled against rain, and tied shut with a loop of braided horsehair. This is your personal item kit, not glamorous, not glorious, but absolutely vital when you're hundreds of miles from anyone willing to lend you a comb or a prayer. Inside, carefully wrapped in a square of red silk faded to something more like rust, is your bone comb, smooth, simple, and carved from the rib of a sheep that once tried to kick you in the chest. You kept the rib as revenge. Mongol hair might be coarse and wind-knotted, but a good comb is worth its weight in knives. You run it through your hair each night, pulling out bits of grit, hay, and unspoken regrets. Once a beetle fell out, you're still not sure if that meant something. Tucked beside the comb is your pair of tweezers. Yes, tweezers. Made of bent bronze, they're slim, sturdy, and surprisingly sharp. You mostly use them for splinters, but once plucked an eyebrow hair for luck before a skirmish. You won, by the way. Historians still argue whether Mongols actually carried grooming tools like these daily or if that's romanticized nonsense. But when your beard is full of grass seeds and your face smells like goat, even a warlord starts looking for tweezers. There's a tiny cloth pouch tied tight with sinew. Inside, a lump of chalky white soap, fat-based and infused with juniper ash. You use it sparingly, only when the dust has turned your skin to bark or when you're invited to sit near anyone with a nose. It smells like pine and faint apologies. You lather it in cold water with a rag or, on luxury days, a bit of rabbit fur. Your rag, for the record, is an old strip of wool torn from a saddle blanket, stiff from age and wear but faithful. You've had it so long you've given it a name, Scratch. Scratch has cleaned everything from blood to berry juice to horse sweat off your face. Sometimes all 3 in one day. One item you're particularly proud of is a compact bone mirror, polished so finely that it reflects your blurry outline in a ghostly shimmer. You don't look in it often, mostly just to check that your hat's still on straight or that the war paint hasn't run down into clown territory. But once in a while, when you feel truly hollowed out, you look just to confirm that, yes, you're still you. Next to the mirror lies a simple sewing kit. A bone needle, a sinew thread spool, and 2 buttons, 1 bone, 1 horn, saved from previous casualties of hard riding and harder weather. You've restitched your tunic armpit 6 times now. You should have just started calling it a vest, but pride is strange like that. There's also a pinch of beeswax kept in a sealed wooden bead. You use it for waterproofing thread, calming cracked lips, or smoothing out frayed bowstring ends. On cold nights, it hardens like a rock. On warm ones, it softens into balm. You once used it to seal a scroll. And another time to grease a saddle buckle during a lightning-fast escape. Your small flint and steel set is here, too, not for fires, those live in your tool roll, but for lighting tiny medicinal bundles. You carry dried herbs, wormwood, mugwort, and wild thyme, rolled in paper-thin bark and used in shamanic burning when sleep gets haunted. You don't use them often, but once, after you found 3 of your comrades lost to a storm. You lit one by the river and didn't speak for hours. Beside the herbs is a leather-wrapped packet of tooth-cleaning sticks, whittled birch twigs chewed at one end into soft bristles. You bite and brush, tasting wood and winter, scraping dried meat grit from your teeth while staring into space like some traveling philosopher of hygiene. Mongols may be fierce, but no one wants meat breath during diplomacy. And now we come to your ointments, 2 small containers, 1 clay. 1 horn, the clay one holds sheep tallow mixed with crushed garlic and marigold petals. You rub it on cracked hands, sore muscles, or on bad days directly onto your temples. Does it help? Not sure, but it makes you smell like you tried. The horn container carries a stronger mixture, pine resin, bear fat, and ash. It smells like death, but it keeps wounds clean and bugs out. You once smeared it on a nasty cut and nearly passed out from the sting. Then again, the cut didn't fester. So, sting, 1, gangrene, 0. There's a strip of waxed parchment with a list of names written in charcoal, your old squad mates. Most of them dead. You keep it folded into a square no bigger than your thumbnail, tucked between layers of your bomb packet. Sometimes, when you're half asleep, you reach for it, not to read, just to feel, just to remember. 1 strange item, a hollow goose feather capped with beeswax. Inside is a powder you won in a bet, a blend of dried mushroom, moss, and something read a passing monk wouldn't name. It's meant to lift the spirit when burned. You've never used it, but you carry it like a secret. And of course there's your travel charm, a crescent of hammered copper engraved with a horse and a flame looped onto a rawhide thong. It hangs inside the satchel's lid. You touch it every morning, not because you believe it'll protect you, but because it reminds you who gave it to you. A sister, a laugh, a goodbye never said. Finally, you keep a pair of leather thong ties. Simple, clean, and endlessly useful, tying up hair, wrapping bandages. Holding up your dignity when your belt fails. You once used one to reattach a loose stirrup. Another to braid a lucky knot before battle. They're unimpressive, but they work. You check this kit daily, always last before mounting up. Because when the wind is full of teeth and the mud clings like betrayal, it's not the blade that saves you. It's the small things, the twigs, the wax, the needle, the smell of juniper soap, and the scratch of wool on your cheek. You zip the satchel closed with your thumb and loop it back to the saddle where it hangs like a quiet, stubborn heartbeat. It's not much. But in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by noise and dirt and waiting death, it's everything that reminds you you're still human, or at least trying to be. You swing your leg over your mount, the wind dragging strands of mane across your face like playful curses. And you do the instinctual thing every Mongol horseman does before moving out. You check your tack. You touch it like a gambler touches loaded dice, with reverence and suspicion. Because the saddle, the reins, the stirrups, these are not just riding tools, they're part of you. If something snaps at full gallop, you don't get a second chance. The grass won't be kind. Your saddle is low and flat, framed with a light wooden structure padded with felt and leather. There's no deep cushion like you'd find in some pampered knight's rig in Europe. This thing is stiff, unforgiving. But it's also built for staying in place while you shoot arrows backwards at your enemies without flipping off like a tossed loaf. Mongol saddles are designed to let your legs absorb the terrain, not your back. So while your spine might grumble after 50 miles, your knees are doing yoga on horseback the entire way. Historians still argue whether the iron stirrups of Mongol warriors were truly the innovation that made their archery so unstoppable, or whether the secret was just relentless training since age 4. Either way, you place your feet into those metal stirrups like locking into a personal fortress. They're broad, heavy, and cold at dawn. You sometimes wrap them in wool when riding in snow so they don't freeze your toes off mid-battle. Not very glamorous. But toes are worth keeping. The saddle's pommel and cantle rise in a slight arc, enough to grip your thighs during sharp turns or sudden stops. And they double as hooks for extra baggage, which you drape across in layers like a migrating snail with survivalist tendencies. Spare bowstrings, cooking pots, your cloak. It's all here, wrapped, lashed, knotted down with hide cords and anxiety. Underneath the saddle is a thick felt pad called a turlig, depending who you ask, layered with sheep wool to protect the horse's spine from both you and your overpacked saddle dreams. You check for burrs and stones constantly. A sore-backed horse means a slow horse, and a slow horse out here is just a moving target with emotional baggage. Your reins are thin strips of braided leather, darkened from sweat, storm, and your teeth, because yes, you've held them in your mouth while double drawing a bow before. You're not proud of the moment, but you're alive, which is a fair trade. You keep them loose, steering more with your legs than hands. Mongol horses don't need micromanagement. They're born knowing how to follow the wind and ignore instructions. A pair of rawhide girths loop beneath the belly, holding saddle to beast with a tension that feels like a handshake. You check them twice, tug once for good measure, and still don't fully trust them until you've ridden 10 minutes without hearing a strap snap like the world's meanest rubber band. The crupper, that tail strap that keeps your saddle from sliding forward, is cracked but hanging on. You stitched it back together last week using some thread you borrowed from a silk merchant. It's bright purple, now your horse looks like it's got royalty holding up its butt. Fashion, Mongol style, you've also added your own touch, a small hidden pouch sewn beneath the saddle flap where you keep your sharpest knife and your dullest thoughts. It's for emergencies, the kind where you cut loose a trapped foot, or, worse, you never talk about that pouch, but every rider has one. Some warriors knot a charm into their stirrup leather, maybe a deer tooth or a coin with a hole through the center. You've got a small ring that belonged to your grandfather laced into the saddle girth. It jingles faintly on rough rides, like a bell tolling for luck or warning. You also carry a saddlebag on either side, worn leather, one dyed red, the other left plain. They're not just decoration. One holds dried dung for kindling and a fire starter kit tucked deep in a tin container that once held tea leaves. The other contains your spare boot socks, an extra pair of gloves. And your prized possession, a bit of honey in a sealed gourd. You guard it like a dragon hoarding dreams. Sometimes you check the saddle not for what's there, but what isn't anymore. Like the time a fox tried to steal your glove while you were napping under your horse, or the storm that soaked everything and turned your wool saddle pad into something resembling a wet sheep that hates you personally. One rider you knew tried replacing his saddle with a Chinese-style padded version once. He lasted a day. Said it was like riding a marshmallow during a boulder fight. You still laugh about that, even if he doesn't. Mostly because he didn't get the smell out for weeks. You also adjust your girth straps depending on terrain, loose for flat plains, tight for hills, and double-checked near rivers because if you fall mid-crossing, the current takes your saddle and your dignity both. You once watched a rider chase his saddle downstream like a sad fish. He never caught it. But he did discover how cold mountain rivers can be in spring. One fringe habit you picked up is rubbing a tiny bit of animal fat on the stirrup leathers to keep them supple. You do it at night, by firelight, muttering curses and lullabies alike. It smells terrible, but your gear has outlasted gear twice as fancy. Sometimes, when you're alone, you lean forward in the saddle and pat your horse's neck, whispering nonsense. Not because you're sentimental, but because the saddle creaks and shifts in rhythm with the horse, and in that moment, it feels like the whole world is riding with you. You've stitched this saddle back together more times than you can count, replaced worn straps with braided horsehair, plugged holes with patches cut from old gloves. There's even a knife-slit scar in the seat from a battle in the reeds. You left it, a reminder that even things meant to carry us can blade. And then you run your fingers over the stitching one last time, glance down at your stirrups, your saddle pads, your reins. You swing into place, lean your weight into the gear, and let your horse pick up pace. Because your tack isn't just about sitting upright, it's the difference between grace and splatter, between speed and a broken collarbone, between surviving a storm or sliding off into a puddle of history. So you ride, one creak at a time, one strap at a time, and pray nothing snaps until at least after dinner. You lean forward as your horse picks up its trot, and beneath you the rhythm of hoofbeats echoes like a second heartbeat. The wind slices across the steppe and your travel cloak flutters out behind you, ragged, patched, and heavy with the memory of too many storms. You always keep it rolled tight behind your saddle, tied with goat leather thongs, and even though it smells like smoke and wet wool, you'd never trade it. This cloak has been your tent, your blanket, your shade, and once your flag during a confusing skirmish where no one quite knew who was winning. You survived, so maybe you did. Your spare clothes are stowed away in a waterproof sack, stitched with gut lining to keep out even the rudest downpours. Inside, there's a second deal, the traditional Mongol robe, this one dyed a pale ochre, with a frayed collar and a repaired underarm seam where a hawk once tried to land on you mid-hunt. It's lighter than your primary one, more suited for warm days or drying quickly by fire. You fold it with care, not because you're neat, but because no one wants to pull out clothes that smell like sheep and regret and discover half of them are mold. You also pack extra undergarments, linen if you're lucky, wool if you're realistic, and sometimes just strips of old cloth wrapped mummy style when nothing else is clean. You've learned that a week on the steppe with no clean breeches is a lesson in chafing and humility. Historians still argue whether Mongol warriors prioritized hygiene or simply embraced the scent of conquest. Based on your saddle sores, you vote for more breeches. And socks. Oh yes, you have socks, knitted wool, patched more times than a bandit's conscience, and always stuffed inside your spare boots. They matter more than pride. On frozen mornings, they're what keeps you from losing toes. You once loaned a pair to a comrade whose feet had turned a color you politely refused to describe. He tried to name his child after you later. You declined but accepted a portion of his jerky stash. Speaking of boots, you carry a spare pair strapped tightly to your saddlebag, heels facing out, soles thick as irony. They're traditional Mongol riding boots, upturned toes, stiff leather, soft inner lining, and wide enough to stuff with extra cloth or the occasional emergency nutcake. They're not just for walking, they are for surviving puddles, brambles, and social awkwardness when your first pair starts squelching like a frog's death song. Sometimes you bring a headscarf, not just for sandstorms, but for identity, for warmth, and for those moments when you need to disguise yourself as someone less conspicuous, like a wandering monk or a person who makes good decisions. It's made of woven cotton, dyed blue with indigo, and wraps around your head and face with comforting anonymity. You've tied it 20 different ways. Each one wrong until it feels right. You pack an extra sash, too, a long fabric belt used to secure your deal, hold knives, or drag an unconscious friend out of the snow. It's a deep red, faded and sun-bleached to rosewood. Once it held up a tent. Another time it saved your saddlebag from sliding off a cliff. You once considered writing poetry about this sash, but decided against it for your dignity's sake. And let's not forget your fire cloak, the thicker, burn-scarred layer you keep for nights around open flames. It smells like smoke, buttered meat, and faint terror. You use it when you know the wind will howl or when you're trying to sleep near a fire with one eye open and a knife in your belt. It's heavier than your main travel cloak, patched with pieces from a dozen former garments that didn't survive the lifestyle. You call it old char because it's been half-charred at least 3 times. You keep one pair of fingerless gloves wrapped in a square of felt. The left thumb has a cutout, deliberately sliced for easier bowstring grip. The right palm has an extra layer of horsehide sewn in because you once rode barehanded and learned why reins don't love you back. Mongol gloves aren't just for fashion, they're for survival, stealth, and snack concealment. You once hid dried fruit in yours, still found a raisin a week later. Sometimes you carry a padded tunic, quilted and cross-stitched with cotton stuffing. It's your version of armor when the real stuff is too heavy or too obvious. It's thick, holds warmth well, and once stopped a poorly thrown dagger that bounced off and embedded itself in a nearby tree. You didn't tell the guy who threw it how close he came. He already looked embarrassed enough. You also carry a spare woolen hood, shaped like a teardrop and lined with rabbit fur. It ties beneath the chin and blocks wind better than your sense of humor. You wear it when the air gets sharp enough to cut cheeks. Or when you're hiding tears from saddle blisters. No judgment. In a tiny pouch sewn into the lining of your spare deal, you've hidden a pair of fabric foot traps, strips of linen meant to bind your feet when boots fail or vanish. They also work as bandages, sling ties, and once memorably, a way to silence a panicking goat during a river crossing. You don't want to talk about it, but the goat survived, and there's always one extra thing, something you shove in at the last minute. Maybe an extra tunic gifted by a passing trader. Maybe a patchwork blanket you swore you'd leave behind but couldn't. Maybe a shirt stitched by your cousin who told you it would bring luck even if the sleeves are different lengths. It doesn't matter if it's useful, it matters that it's yours. You fold, roll, wrap, and tie each garment into a neat bundle. You lash it tight beneath your saddle like a sleeping beast. It rides with you, silent and steady, through sun, wind, hail, and metaphorical doom. And when the storm hits or the river swells, you pull it free with calloused hands and quiet gratitude. Because on the steppe, you can't count on comfort, but you can count on what you've packed, on the cloak that breaks the wind, on the spare deal that smells faintly like pine and history, on the socks that cradle your soul, well, at least your soul's, and the gloves that remind you that even in the chaos of empire, someone thought about warmth. You ride with a wardrobe born not from vanity, but from survival, from centuries of movement, from generations who packed light but packed right, and so do you, one stitch at a time. You pause beside a lonely stream, its water laughing over cold stones like it knows secrets you don't. Dismounting slowly, you reach for the next most precious piece of gear after your saddle and cloak, your tools and supplies for fire and repair. Because while glory makes good stories, a broken bowstring or a wet fire-starting kit will make sure those stories never happen. This is the less glamorous part of being a Mongol horseman, the part that doesn't end up in songs, but it's the part that makes sure you're around to hear them. First, the fire kit. It's wrapped tightly in a small, oil-treated goatskin pouch tucked deep in your saddlebag because fire on the steppe is not a luxury, it's a lifeline. You unwrap it carefully, even though your fingers are stiff from cold. Inside is a curved fire striker, dark with soot and worn smooth from use. It's iron. Plain and practical, shaped to fit the curve of your fingers like a handshake from an old friend. Next to it is a bundle of tinder, soft, fibrous shavings from dried bark mixed with dung scrapings and grass fluff. You've also got a few curls of birch bark folded flat, the kind that catches a spark even when damp. One strip has a bit of red wax on the corner, leftover from a Chinese candle. Traded years ago from a caravan that came in looking for salt and left missing 3 chickens. A good fire has saved your life more times than you can count. Once during a sudden snow squall, once during a sleepless watch after a wolf pack circled your camp, and once during the world's most embarrassing attempt to cook marmot. Flint stones clink softly in the pouch too, gray-blue with chipped edges from so many strikes. You have your preferred piece, sharp on one end and lucky. You'd never admit it, but you once kissed it before a night battle. It lit first try. The victory was maybe unrelated, but the ritual stuck. There's also a tiny, carefully wrapped bundle of dried horse dung. Yes, really, because once it's dried, it burns slow and steady, doesn't spark wildly, and smells only slightly less offensive than your socks after rain. You keep it tucked in a thin reed container so it doesn't break into dust. A handful can start a cooking fire, heat a tent, or drive away mosquitoes, or at least confuse them. Then there's the sewing kit. It lives in a narrow leather tube sealed with a carved wooden stopper shaped like a goat's head. Someone's idea of humor, you think. Inside are bone needles of varying sizes, some slightly bent from years of mending saddle flaps, cloaks, and once your friend's ear flap after a bad haircut gone tragic. The thread comes from sinew, wool, and sometimes stolen bits of silk you claimed were leftovers. One spool is dyed black, another plain beige. There's also a half-used coil of horsehair thread, stronger than you'd think, though it makes a sound like betrayal when you pull it tight. Historians still argue whether Mongol warriors carried personalized toolkits or whether communal sharing was the norm on campaign. You're pretty sure it was both. Everyone had their own fire striker, but no one wanted to carry 3 spools of thread when someone else could. Still, you keep yours well stocked. Trusting others is fine. Trusting your hem to stay stitched when riding full speed, that's personal. There's also a scrap of beeswax you use to waterproof seams. You rub it along the edges of your boots, saddlebag corners, even your gloves when a storm threatens. Once you dropped it into a fire by mistake and nearly wept. A rare luxury, wax, and irreplaceable out here unless you feel like charming a beehive. You have a small awl tucked beside the sewing tube. It's wooden-handled, the tip darkened from being heated in fire, yes. It doubles as a tiny branding tool when needed. You've used it to punch holes in leather, to fish a hook from a fish's mouth, and to pry open a stubborn lid from a trader's tin. It's the multi-tool of the premodern world, and you carry it like a penknife for the apocalypse. Your sharpening stone is wrapped in a strip of hide, the kind that used to be part of a bridle until a goat chewed it into submission. It's flat, palm-sized, and rough on one side, smooth on the other. You use it to sharpen everything, your knives, your eating spoon, even the metal ends of your stirrups when feeling paranoid and poetic. And tucked in with your tools is a tiny mirror, metal not glass, polished to a near reflection. It's not for vanity, mostly. It's used for signaling across long distances, flashing light toward your comrades during a hunt or skirmish. You've also used it to check your own face after a particularly unfortunate nose injury. You didn't like what you saw, but the mirror didn't lie. You keep twine too, coiled around your water flask's neck like a snake waiting for a task. Twine ties up broken sandal straps, secures tent poles, mends reins, and has once been used to help construct a sling for a sprained arm, your own, when you attempted a jump that your horse disagreed with midair. You still swear it was a rock's fault. And somewhere always you've got pins, long metal ones, good for fastening cloaks or holding together meat rolls or pretending to pick a lock when someone says you can't. You never could, but the gesture felt good. There's also a bone toggle that used to fasten your old saddle blanket, now repurposed as a makeshift button for your torn jerkin. Improvisation is not just survival, it's a way of life. There's also that mysterious strip of bark with holes punched through it. You're not quite sure if it's meant for kindling, a flute, or a very unimpressive whistle. A trader once claimed it was part of a charm against lice. You carry it anyway because superstition loves company. You wrap everything back up again, rolling the pouch like a pastry of preparedness. You tie it closed with practiced fingers and tuck it deep into the corner of your saddlebag where it won't bounce loose during rough rides. These items may not win battles, but they fix what's broken afterward. Because when your cloak tears, or your boots betray you, or your fire refuses to light and the steppe wind mocks you with cold silence, it's not your bow that saves you, it's these humble tools, the striker, the thread, the wax, the twine that binds, the awl that punctures, the mirror that reminds you that you're still here, still standing, still stubborn. They're not glorious, but they work, and they go wherever you do. You stretch your legs as your horse dips its head to drink. The sound of rippling water soft and rhythmic beneath the low hum of the wind. In this brief moment of stillness, you take stock, not of your weapons, not of your clothes, but of the strange, sturdy, humble containers that keep your chaotic life tied together. You're not carrying around shiny trunks or treasure chests. Your baggage is stitched, knotted, looped, and slung in containers shaped by centuries of movement and a love of not losing your lunch to a gallop. Your saddle is the command center. It's high-backed, wooden-framed, and so perfectly shaped to your body now that you swear you can find it in the dark by touch alone. Underneath it, hidden from the worst weather and bouncing no more than necessary, are the saddle bags, your precious, loyal, eternally overloaded sidekicks. Each is crafted from stiff leather, dyed with onion skins or walnut husks, and lined with coarse wool to protect the contents from jostling damage. They hang like the balanced wings of a hawk, tied tight. Water-resistant and deceptively deep. Inside one of them you store your food pouch, the leather one stitched from goat hide and marked with ink symbols only you can read. It bulges at the seams with roasted millet, dried mutton strips, fermented curds, and that half-eaten ball of sheep fat you keep swearing you'll finish eventually. There's also your emergency food ration, a dense cake of ground grain and lard, hard enough to be used as a weapon or a disappointing pillow. Historians still argue whether these rations were intentionally flavorless for preservation or simply an accident that no one dared to question. In the other saddlebag is your utility pouch. It contains all the small odds and ends you'd hate to realize are missing when you're already 3 days from the last campfire. A flint you carved with your initials in a moment of boredom. An extra arrow tip wrapped in cloth. A tiny charm your mother gave you, just a bead sewn into felt. But you always pack it. One time you didn't, and the storm that hit made you vow never again. Attached to your saddle via thick leather straps is a small barrel-shaped container made of birch bark and stitched tight with horsehair cord. That's your dry case for tinder or messages or anything else that absolutely cannot get wet unless you want tears. It's light, floats if dropped in a river, and you once saw a friend use his to carry a terrified ferret. You don't ask questions about the ferret anymore. Hanging off your belt is your drinking flask made from a hollowed-out ram's horn sealed with beeswax. It swings when you walk, sways when you ride, and occasionally bonks your thigh in a way that reminds you to drink more or adjust your belt. You've also got a small canteen-style leather bladder, squishy and always smelling faintly of kumis no matter how many times you rinse it. It's a Mongol mystery. You've accepted it. Tied behind your saddle is your bundle roll, not the neat canvas-wrapped affair of a modern traveler, but a layered collection of wool blankets, spare clothes, and thin tools rolled into a lumpy burrito of necessity. It's held together with a length of braided rope you once used to tether a goat, then used to rescue a friend from a riverbank, then used to hang your wet socks over a fire. That rope has seen things. You also carry a string of small pouches fastened together with sinew, your version of a utility belt. Each pouch contains something small but vital. One holds flint and steel, one holds dried herbs for wounds or seasoning, sometimes both. One hides a tightly wrapped packet of tea leaves, and one just has a smooth stone in it that you like to hold when the nights get too quiet. You've never told anyone why, and don't forget the hide water skin slung across your horse's left flank. It's swollen from the morning's river fill-up, tied tight with a horn stopper. These skins are sewn with the same precision as your saddle. Any leak is a betrayal that earns immediate replacement. You once rode an extra day just to trade for a new one after a mysterious puncture left you tasting river mud. You still don't trust sharp twigs. Your bow case and quiver count too, more than just weapon holders. The bow case is stiff leather on the outside, lined with rabbit fur on the inside to keep moisture away and warmth in. It cradles your composite bow like a mother tucking in a baby dragon. The quiver is slung high over your back, also wrapped in hide, with a waxed canvas flap you can pull over the fletching in rain. And within its secret side pocket you keep one extra bowstring, coiled precious and scented faintly of pine resin and tension. You've even got a pouch of coins and trade trinkets. Not a full purse, but enough to make a traveling merchant raise an eyebrow. It's stuffed with bronze bits, Chinese cash coins with the square holes, buttons from Persian robes. And a piece of dyed cloth you could swear is silk, though you've never quite figured out what it used to be. Some of these came from trade, some from wagers, one from the boot of a corpse, but that's a story for another night. Historians debate whether every Mongol horseman carried such a curated personal inventory, or whether these were just the habits of the more independent-minded riders. You suspect both are true. Some carried only a blade and their boldness. You prefer a full toolkit, 6 spare fasteners, and an irrational amount of goat jerky. Tied beneath your saddle is one last pouch, your repair stash. Thread, bone needles, leather patches, and small cloth scraps that serve as bandages or hasty reinforcement. It jingles softly when you ride, a sound you've come to associate with safety, or at least the hope that when something inevitably breaks, you'll fix it before someone else notices. You don't carry trunks, boxes, or crates. You don't need wheels or wagons. Everything you bring is soft, pliable, and ready to roll, tie, or lash. You are essentially one giant mobile fabric burrito riding another hairier, slightly more judgmental burrito, but it works. It always has, because the difference between freezing or surviving often comes down to one sealed pouch, one waterproof wrap, one well-packed roll of spare socks tied with a strip of sinew instead of hope. And as the sky darkens and the cold creeps closer, you reach behind you and find everything you need. Right where you tied it, packed with a quiet care passed down by riders who knew no one out here survives just by bravery alone. You survive by how you pack. The wind hums low as the sun dips toward the edge of the sky, brushing everything in copper. Your horse flicks its ears, alert, maybe a little impatient. You, on the other hand, are focused on something far less poetic than the horizon, because dinner won't cook itself, and on the steppe, a Mongol horseman's cooking setup is where rugged necessity meets mild culinary chaos. You start by clearing a space near a patch of flat stones, then pulling your fire kit from your pouch, the striker, the flint, the dry dung, the shredded bark. A few practice strikes and a curl of smoke coils upward like it's waking from a nap. Soon a small fire crackles, sending out just enough heat to start the work of turning cold, tough ingredients into something resembling food. Your cookware isn't fancy, but it works. A single iron pot, blackened from use, hangs from a collapsible iron tripod you carry tied up in your bundle roll. You found it on a battlefield and decided it deserved a second life. A shallow bronze pan, good for frying or baking on coals, rests on a flat stone you warm in the fire. There's also a beaten-up ladle you carved from a thick branch and a horn spoon with a chipped tip that's still your favorite despite what everyone says about real utensils. The main event tonight, dried mutton. You fish a few stringy strips from your food pouch, sniff them for optimism, then toss them into the bubbling pot of water. The scent rises slowly, meaty, and vaguely nostalgic. You stir it in circles, hypnotic. While your horse eyes you like it's wondering if you'd share, you won't. Well, maybe a bit. Next comes the ground millet, a dry, tan, powdery mix of crushed grain and grass seeds, packed into a cloth satchel and tied tight with a leather thong. You sprinkle it in, thickening the stew like a poor man's porridge. It's not fancy, but it's warm, and sometimes that's all your body wants. You've also got fermented mare's milk in a leather flask, arag, the fizzy, tart, mildly alcoholic drink that's equal parts hydration and punch to the throat. It's the drink of your people. It's also what you once used to clean a wound, tenderize meat, and in one desperate moment, rinse your mouth after biting into a mushroom that turned out to be not food. Historians still argue whether the Mongols drank arag primarily for pleasure or survival. Frankly, it's usually both. You sip from the flask now, letting the sharp taste settle on your tongue like a warning and a celebration. There's no plate to eat from, just your bowl carved from a thick slice of pine, softened by years of use and smelling faintly of smoke. You scoop the stew, steaming and heavy with chewy bits, and let it sit for a moment. The surface bubbles lazily. Somewhere in there is a scrap of bone you'll need to spit out, like finding treasure you didn't want. While the stew cools, you prepare the night's bread. Yes, bread, technically. It's a flat cake of flour, salt, and water. Kneaded roughly and slapped onto a hot rock or pan, there's no yeast, no fluff, no crust worth bragging about, but once it chars just enough on the bottom and smells faintly nutty, it'll do. You flip it with the horn spoon, accidentally send it tumbling into the fire once, rescue it with a stick, and call it extra flavor. Your spice pouch contains exactly 3 items: crushed garlic from a caravan trade, dried onion greens, and a tiny pinch of black pepper so rare you measure it out like a miser counting coins. Tonight you skip the pepper and go heavy on the garlic. It overpowers the gaminess of the meat and keeps imaginary demons at bay, or real ones. You're not taking chances. Nearby, a piece of liver dries on a stick, not because you like dried liver but because you dropped it earlier and can't stomach wasting it. You'll feed it to the dog you don't have yet, or keep it in your pouch until it fossilizes. That's the Mongol way. After eating, cleanup is a casual ritual. You wipe the bowl with bread. If there's none left, you use sand or grass or snow or a shirt sleeve you pretend isn't your own. Then you scrub the pot with ash and rinse it with a bit of leftover water or air egg if you're feeling extravagant or already a little tipsy. Clean enough isn't about sparkle, it's about not getting sick next time. You pour the last of your broth into a bark cup and sip it slowly, savoring the warmth. You let your mind wander back to home camps, to shared meals where laughter replaced spice, to the first time you overcooked meat so badly it shattered like glass. You remember the slap on the back from your uncle who said, "Perfect, more for the dogs." You hadn't laughed then, but you do now. There's something comforting in this simplicity. No endless pots, no spices with names you can't pronounce, no complicated recipes. Just heat, meat, and motion. You ride, you cook. You eat, you sleep. Maybe you don't have a kitchen, but you've got everything you need. Your horse has already started grazing nearby, ignoring the smell of food now that it knows nothing good is coming its way. You toss it a chunk of dried apple anyway. It accepts it like a gift it neither wanted nor deserved, but eats it all the same. And as the fire dies low and the shadows grow longer, you wrap the pot in cloth, slip the spoon back into its hide pocket, and carefully nestle the salt pouch back into your saddlebag like it's priceless treasure. It kind of is. Food may not be fancy out here, but it's yours, and every bite carries you just a little farther across the wild, rolling sea of grass. You gather the last embers into a tidy pile and whisper a quiet thanks to the fire. Then you burp. And whisper a quieter apology to the night. Night falls hard and fast out here. 1 minute you're sipping lukewarm arag, and the next, the stars have poured themselves across the sky like someone spilled a bucket of silver pinpricks onto black velvet. The temperature drops too, no polite warning, no gradual shift, just a sudden biting chill that sinks into your bones and makes your nose feel like someone's lightly pinching it with ice tongs. And that's when you start the bedtime ritual, Mongol edition. You begin by checking your horse first, as always. Its legs, hooves, breath, then the saddle straps and the gear lashings. Everything must be snug, tight, and reachable if something howls in the dark and you need to spring into action. Your horse grunts at you and flares its nostrils like it's mildly offended that you didn't offer a second apple. It gets over it. Then you unroll your bedding, a simple affair but surprisingly cozy when properly layered. First, a felt pad to block the cold from seeping up from the ground like a thief. Then a wool blanket, thick, scratchy, slightly smoky smelling and worn at the edges from years of campfires and claws. Finally, a second layer of hide or fur depending on the season. Tonight its sheepskin smells like safety and lanolin. You've slept on snow, on sand, on ice. Nothing beats this patch of dry grass and your 3-layered miracle of medieval insulation. Your sleeping spot is chosen with care. You're no amateur. Avoid the base of hills, cold sinks there. Avoid dips in the ground, rainwater loves those. You angle yourself just so that your face is protected from the wind, but your ears can still catch any unusual rustle or approaching hoofbeat. That's not paranoia, that's survival. Historians still argue whether Mongol horsemen always slept with their boots on. You do, because frostbite is not a glamorous way to lose toes. You remove only what you must, your outer coat if it's dry, your gloves. If they're intact and not frozen to your hands, you loosen your belt but keep your knife tucked under your blanket edge. Just in case, it's not always other men you fear. Wolves, steppe cats, or worse, the noise of hooves that don't belong to anyone you know. Some nights you sleep with your head on your saddle, using the bundled coat as a pillow. Other nights, when your body aches in places you didn't know existed, you fold a felt strip and rest your head directly on the earth. It's humbling, it's grounding. And sometimes it's just because your saddle smells like wet goat. Nearby, your horse dozes standing up, its legs locked, its body still as stone. You don't tether it unless the wind is howling or your instincts twitch. You trust each other, mostly, though once it walked 3 kilometers while you slept and left you snoring in an empty field like a discarded sock. That was an awkward morning. To keep warm, you sleep curled tightly, knees bent, arms tucked. You once met a man who swore by sleeping flat on his back, arms folded like a tomb statue. He also snored like thunder and got eaten by a bear. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. If it's raining, you drape a hide above you using your saddle and spear to form a crude lean-to. If it's snowing, you pile grass and dung on the outside to form an insulating nest. If it's a clear night, you do nothing at all but lie back and stare into the galaxy like you're waiting for a message from the gods. Some nights, you get one. Usually it's don't fall asleep with food in your sleeve again. As the cold deepens, you reach into your bundle and retrieve a secret weapon, your inner vest lined with rabbit fur and stitched by your aunt who said never trust spring nights, they lie. She was right. You slip it on under your tunic and sigh with a kind of gratitude that makes your ribs hurt a little from happiness. You whisper her name to the wind, just softly, just once. There's a rhythm to sleeping on the steppe. You shift a little every hour without really waking, just enough to keep your limbs from stiffening. You listen without listening. You sleep with one ear open and one eye half dreaming. It's a dance between rest and readiness. You won't win beauty contests this way, but you will wake up alive. Occasionally, your dreams take you elsewhere, to yurts filled with laughter, to voices you haven't heard since the last big migration, to the time you first learned to ride without holding on and the wind lifted your hair like it was proud of you. Sometimes you dream of thunder and fire and horses that disappear. Those nights, you wake sweating, check your gear, sip from your water skin, and lie back down without a word. Fringe tales passed around campfires say the stars can rearrange themselves for those who sleep under them long enough, that constellations whisper secrets about where not to go tomorrow, or that if you fall asleep under the wrong tree, your soul might wander off before you wake up. You don't believe them, except for when you kind of do. There's no tent over your head, no lock on a door, no mattress that remembers your shape. But you've got your horse, your blanket, your belly half full, and a knife at your side. That's more than many ever get. And you've learned that real comfort has less to do with feathers and pillows and more to do with knowing the wind won't surprise you. Tonight, as frost kisses your blanket's edges and the silence grows deep enough to hear your own breath echo in your chest, you smile. Not because life is easy, but because it is yours. Because out here on this cold, ancient plain, you are exactly what the world made you to be, alert, wrapped in wool, breathing fog into the stars. Sleep for now, but only lightly. Morning always comes fast on the steppe, and you never really know what it's bringing with it. You wake before the sun. Not because you want to, but because the cold reaches under your blanket like a ghost with icy fingers and gently nudges you in the ribs. Your breath floats above your face in lazy clouds as you blink into the still dark sky. Your joints creak when you sit up, the kind of stiffness that says you've been riding too long and sleeping too hard. You stretch your arms wide, one pops loudly, and you whisper a quiet insult at your own shoulder, which seems to laugh in reply. First order of business, fire. You rise slowly, still wrapped in your blanket like a snail in woolen armor, and shuffle to your fire pit from last night. The embers are still faintly glowing. You grin success. With practiced hands, you add a few twigs and dried grass, then blow gently until the red glow flares back to life like a dragon you bribed with breath. Within minutes, the warmth creeps into your fingers and you thaw just enough to feel human again. Then comes breakfast, which, if you're lucky, is the leftover stew from last night scraped from the pot and thinned with water. If you're less lucky, it's dried cheese, hard as a rock and slightly tangy, the kind that squeaks against your teeth like you're biting into a chalky violin string. Mongol cheese isn't for the faint of heart, but it travels well, lasts forever, and tastes marginally better if you dunk it in tea. Speaking of tea, there's no better start to a Mongol morning than a bowl of hot, salty milk tea. You pour water into the pot, toss in a handful of black tea bricks you chipped off with your knife, and add a generous splash of milk from your hide pouch. If you've got butter, you mix that in too, whisking it with a twig until it looks more like broth than tea. A pinch of salt goes in next. The final result smells strange and comforting, like a hug from someone who just wrestled a sheep. Historians still argue whether Mongol milk tea evolved from Chinese, Tibetan, or Turkic traditions, but you don't care. To you, it's simply the warm tide that lifts your sleepy brain into something resembling clarity. You sip slowly, hands cupped around the bowl, steam brushing your cheeks as the fire crackles beside you. You close your eyes for a second, just one more second, then the day slaps you back into motion. You pack your bedding in reverse order, fur first, then wool, then the felt mat rolled into a tight tube and tied with a leather strap. Everything folds down small, as if trained to obey your rhythm. Your bowl and spoon go into their cloth wrap, your flint and striker into a side pouch, and your precious tea brick back into its goatskin envelope like it's sacred currency. Next comes your armor if you've been traveling light overnight. You shrug into your padded coat, cinch it at the waist, then strap on your lamellar vest, those overlapping iron plates sewn into leather strips. It's not the most comfortable thing. But it's like hugging a very angry turtle, one that might just save your life later. Your horse watches all this with the expression of a creature that knows what comes next and isn't sure it approves. You check its hooves for ice or stones, brush down its flanks with a handful of dry grass, and whisper the usual string of half-threats and apologies that pass for Mongol morning pep talk. You drop me today, and I swear I'll turn you into stew. It snorts like it's heard that one before. Then it's time to saddle up. The wooden frame of your saddle creaks as you fasten the girth strap. You check your stirrups, adjust your gear bundles, food pouch, extra arrows, a spare bowstring wrapped in oiled cloth, and slide your boots into the stirrups with the weight of someone who knows what miles lie ahead. Your right hand finds your bow notched through its sling. Your left adjusts your hat, and with a gentle kick you move. The steppe wakes up around you. Birds wheel high above in ragged spirals. Distant herds of gazelles stir in the mist, then vanish like ghosts into the grass. A fox darts across your path and pauses just long enough to glare at you like you stole its breakfast. The wind begins to rise, a steady breeze brushing your cheeks and tugging at your coat like a sleepy child needing attention. You ride in silence for the first hour, just you and the thump of hooves on frozen dirt. You check the horizon, scanning for smoke, riders, or silhouettes that don't belong. You chew a strip of dried horse meat, tougher than your boots and tasting faintly of smoke and regret. And you hum low and tuneless because silence can get too loud out here if you let it. Eventually you spot another rider in the distance, a smudge of motion against the sea of grass. You can't tell yet if it's friend or foe, so you slow, angle slightly east and pretend you didn't see them. It's a game, a dance, one you've learned to play with casual precision. If they follow, you'll know. If they vanish, even better. Sometimes riding is like breathing. Other times it's like trying not to be noticed by the sky. You pass an old cairn, a stack of stones marked with faded strips of cloth fluttering in the breeze, and ovu. You circle it clockwise 3 times, not because you believe in spirits, but because it's bad luck not to. You toss a pebble onto the pile and whisper a wish, maybe for safety, maybe for something warmer than dried cheese, maybe just for one day without saddle sores. Riding at dawn has its perks. The sun finally spills over the edge of the horizon, turning the whole plain gold and pink. Your shadow stretches out ahead of you like it's leading the way, and for a brief moment everything feels still. Eternal, beautiful in the way only wild things can be. Then your horse sneezes directly onto your leg, and the magic sort of ends. Still, you ride on because the day has begun. The wind is rising, the grass is whispering secrets. And breakfast, cheese, stew, and all sits contentedly in your belly, waiting for whatever comes next. You've been riding for hours now. The sun's well above the horizon and the grass has lost its golden glow, turning back to that familiar dusty green-gray that stretches forever. Your legs ache from the saddle, your shoulders from the armor, and your butt from the general injustice of medieval transportation. You shift your weight slightly, left cheek, then right, trying to find that mythical sweet spot where bone and wood don't constantly argue. Spoiler, you never quite find it. This stretch of the journey is about pace. You're not galloping, that's for when you're either late, showing off, or being chased. Today is the steady trot, the Mongol cruise control. Your horse flicks its ears back occasionally, probably wondering why you're humming the same off-key tune for the 3rd hour. Straight, you can't help it. It keeps your mind moving while the world stays flat and familiar. You scan the horizon again, always, not just for threats, but for water, shelter, or signs of game. A distant ridge might mean a stream, a circle of buzzards might mean carrion, or worse, company. You once mistook a large rock for a campfire, rode half a mile toward it, and had a very awkward hour of pretending you meant to do that. Sometimes the steppe plays tricks on you. Today, though, you've got a goal in mind, a waypoint, one of those half-real, half-whispered places only known through stories passed down over smoky fires and half-empty bowls. A spring tucked between twin hills where the grass grows in thick mats and the water tastes like it remembers the mountain it came from. You've never been there yourself, but your cousin swore by it and he only lied about dice and sheep. You pass through a stretch of open plain where the wind hits you sideways. It whistles through the trees that aren't really trees, more like overgrown bushes with ambitions. Their leaves rattle like they're gossiping about you, and you shiver despite the sun. The wind out here always carries a whisper of something older than words. It smells faintly of dust, blood, and milk. Mongol perfume. You pause briefly for a midday rest. Not a full stop, just enough to let your horse drink from a shallow stream and to rub your thighs until the pins and needles subside. You chew on a ball of pressed curds, slightly sour, shockingly firm, and capable of chipping a tooth if you're not careful. You chase it with a sip of watered-down arag, the fermented mare's milk that somehow tastes both terrible and wonderful at once. Like someone carbonated yogurt and then dared you to enjoy it. Some Mongols carry honey in tiny leather bladders to add to their drinks. Others believe that ruins the purity of the flavor. Historians still argue whether such additions were common or rare. Your opinion changes daily depending on how sour the arag is. You tie a strip of cloth over your mouth against the dust, adjusting your hat against the sun that now bakes the top of your head like a griddle. You lean forward in the saddle, giving your horse a pat on the neck and murmuring nonsense, part encouragement, part apology. You're both tired, but there's a few more miles before you can stop. The terrain begins to change, slightly higher, slightly rockier. You spot marmot holes and avoid them carefully. One bad step could mean a broken leg, and out here, that's a death sentence. You slow to a walk and keep your eyes low. A marmot pops its head out and stares at you like you owe it money. You nod solemnly and move on. The marmot nods back, respect. As you crest a ridge, you see it at last. The twin hills, the green dip between them, and yes, a ribbon of silver glinting in the sunlight. The spring. You whoop once, mostly for your horse's benefit, and urge it into a gentle canter. The air here smells sweeter, like new grass and damp soil. Like a reward, you dismount with a groan. Your knees wobble, your back cracks, and your hips make a noise like a wagon wheel with a bad axle. You stretch your arms overhead, feel the sun warm your armpits, and shuffle to the water like a man 3 decades older than you actually are. You scoop a handful of cold water to your lips. It's clear, crisp, and so cold it makes your teeth hurt. You smile around the pain. This was worth it. You unsaddle your horse and let it roll in the dirt, kicking up little clouds of dust that sparkle in the light. You rub it down with your tunic and let it graze while you sit under the shade of a stubby pine tree that's bravely clinging to life despite the odds. You lie back on the grass, arms folded under your head, and stare at the sky. A cloud floats past that looks exactly like your uncle, which is weird because you're pretty sure he's still alive. You nap lightly, the kind of doze that's half listening and half dreaming. Your bow is nearby, your knife under your thigh. The saddle flipped upside down to dry out in the sun. The world around you buzzes with insect life, dragonflies, ants, something that might be a murder hornet or might just be a very aggressive beetle. When you wake, it's time to repack, but slower this time. You check your gear with lazy hands, rub your horse's ears, whisper a thank you to the water because out here gratitude matters even if no one hears it. You saddle up again. Every movement more careful than before because a good rest is a trap if you forget to stretch after. And then you ride on, refreshed but wary, because every oasis is also a beacon. Others may know of this place. Bandits, rival scouts, even wolves who have learned the smell of Mongol sweat, but you're not worried, not really. You've got a full belly, a quiet horse, and the open steppe ahead of you. The world may be hard, but in this moment the air is warm, the sky is clear, and your mind is calm. And for a Mongol horseman on the move, that's as close to peace as it gets. The sun begins its slow descent behind you, stretching your shadow across the grass like a thin, lazy giant. You shift in the saddle again, that familiar ache returning to your hips and thighs like an old frenemy. Your horse plods steadily onward, each hoofbeat a lullaby of dull rhythm until the wind changes. It's subtle at first, but you've been out here long enough to notice. The scent shifts, smoke, not fire, but old smoke, distant, faint, enough to set your instincts humming. You slow your mount with a soft nudge of the reins. Your eyes narrow toward the west, where the air trembles just slightly above the plain. It could be another traveler's camp, could be a hunting party, could be something worse. Bandits, deserters, a rival clan, or maybe it's just your nose playing tricks on you again, your brain bored enough to invent danger. Historians still argue whether Mongol patrols followed set scouting patterns or relied more on instinct and rumors passed between herders. You're leaning toward the latter, especially now when your stomach suddenly doesn't feel so relaxed. You veer north slightly, keeping the wind at your back and the sun out of your eyes. No use heading into possible trouble without a reason. You make a mental note to find a rise or even a rocky outcrop to camp behind tonight, not for comfort, for concealment. As twilight deepens, you dismount to walk alongside your horse. You loosen the girth strap slightly and rub its flank with your palm, both to soothe it and to keep your own legs moving. A few miles on horseback feels like a dozen on your knees. Walking helps, sort of. You stretch out your back and rotate your neck until it sounds like a pile of small bones tumbling across a table. You spot a stand of stunted trees in the near distance, short, knotty things that look more like shrubs that gave up halfway through becoming real trees. Good enough. You steer your horse toward them, eyes scanning the ground for tracks. Rabbit, a fox, human boot prints, old. Maybe 2 days, still that gets your heart thudding just a little faster. You pause and crouch, pressing 2 fingers into one of the deeper impressions. The heel points east, someone heading the opposite direction. Maybe that's the smoke you smelled earlier, or maybe they never stopped at all. You find a depression in the ground beside a low ridge shielded on 3 sides, not perfect but close enough. You unpack quickly and quietly, laying out your gear with the practiced precision of someone who's done this hundreds of times. You don't build a fire, not tonight. Cold is better than being seen. Instead, you eat cold, dried mutton, tough as boot leather, but seasoned with a few pinches of wild herbs you picked days ago and kept in a small linen pouch. The flavor doesn't make you sing, but it doesn't make you gag either. You suck on a pebble afterward, tricking your mouth into thinking you've had a drink. You'll ration the water till morning. Your horse shifts restlessly nearby. And you whisper low nonsense at it, mostly half-threats, part lullaby. Don't wander off or I'll let the wolves adopt you. It blinks at you unbothered. You tie it loosely to a nearby bush and then settle down yourself back to a rock, bow across your lap, knife within reach. No full sleep tonight, just a series of half-dozes, like blinking in slow motion. The stars begin to show themselves, one by one, like shy children peeking around the edge of a curtain. The Milky Way stretches above you in a smear of silver dust, and you find yourself wondering, again, why it's called the Milky Way when it looks nothing like milk and everything like spilled ash. Mongols say it's a river the dead ride along. Others say it's the trail left by a goddess fleeing an unwanted suitor. You think maybe it's just there to make you feel small in the best possible way. The wind picks up a bit, rustling the bushes, tugging at your coat like it's telling you secrets. You pull your collar higher and breathe slowly. Every sound matters now. An owl calls, a fox yips, you hear hooves faint far off, could be real, could be your imagination riding laps around your nerves. You doze, wake, doze again, dream of rivers, of riding without armor, of buttered bread, thick and warm from a fire you didn't have to build yourself. A dream where your horse talks and only speaks in insults. You snort yourself awake after that one. By the time the eastern sky turns pale blue and the stars begin to fade, your body aches like you spent the night sparring with invisible enemies. You sit up slowly, every muscle protesting, and rub your eyes until the world returns to focus. You check your gear, nothing missing. Your horse is still there. You murmur a quiet thanks to whoever or whatever watched over you. Just in case, you eat the last of the pressed curds. Saving the chunk of dried fruit for later, it's your version of dessert, which says a lot about your culinary situation out here. You stretch, pack, tighten your saddle straps, and mount up with a grunt that sounds a little too much like your grandfather's laugh. You ride on now with the rising sun behind you and the weight of another night added to your spine, but also with a small, strange sense of satisfaction. You made it through the dark again. You read the wind, trusted your gut, and stayed one step ahead of whatever might have been out there. The steppe is full of threats. But sometimes surviving the night is the victory, and today you get to keep riding, which, for a Mongol on the move, is more than enough. You ride through a patch of morning haze that clings to the ground like a damp old blanket left out overnight. The sun is a pale disk behind the mist, barely warming your shoulders, and the world feels quiet in that eerie, pre-breakfast kind of way. The only sounds are the soft creak of leather, the whisper of grass brushing your horse's legs, and the low grumble of your stomach reminding you that curds are not, in fact, a balanced diet. You pull your coat tighter around you and peer through the fog for shapes that don't belong: riders, wolves, or the dreaded lone camel. You never trust a lone camel. By midday, the fog burns away, revealing another endless plain, this time pocked with low mounds and the remnants of long-abandoned way stations. You spot a few stone markers carved with symbols faded almost to nothing. Mongol, maybe, or Turkic. Hard to tell when they've been sandblasted for 100 years. You nod to them out of habit, respect, or superstition, or both. You pass what was once a burial site. The grave markers are scattered now, half swallowed by grass and time, but you know enough to keep your distance. Not because you're scared, okay, maybe a little, but because there's a certain etiquette on the steppe. You don't bother the dead, and hopefully they return the favor. Mongols often left offerings at such spots: milk, bits of food, strands of horsehair braided with whispered hopes. You leave nothing today, but your glance is enough of a gesture. Later, you ride into a hollow where the grass grows waist-high and thick. Your horse slows, ears twitching forward, and you instinctively reach for your bow, not because you see anything, but because you don't. No birds, no insects, no movement, just the sound of your own breath and the dull thump of your pulse in your ears. You knock an arrow anyway. Because better safe than lunch. You ease forward, scanning the grass. Then from the corner of your eye movement, a rustle, you freeze. Your horse does too, bless its smart little hooves. You wait, and then it appears, a hare, fat and lazy, hopping away without a care in the world. You lower your bow and exhale through your nose. Classic. You consider taking the hare. A bit of meat wouldn't hurt, and your fireless cold meals have gotten a bit too predictable, but something tells you to let it go. Maybe you're feeling soft. Maybe you're just tired of chewing. Either way, the hare gets a free pass today. You steer toward higher ground, scanning the sky for birds. Buzzards, eagles, crows, they are the gossip mongers of the steppe, and if they are circling, it usually means something's happening below. Right now, the sky is mostly empty, except for a few cloud wisps drifting west like they've got somewhere better to be. You reach a gentle slope and ride to the top, where you spot a distant column of smoke, thin and gray, curling upward like a lazy question mark. You frown, still too far to tell what it means, but you mark the direction and decide to curve around it. No need to check every fire up close. That's how people get robbed, or worse, recruited. See, Mongol society wasn't just a giant band of brothers. There were factions, cliques even, clans within clans. Loyalties that shifted like sand. And sometimes, if you passed the wrong fire on the wrong day, you might find yourself invited to join a raiding party you never signed up for. Historians still argue whether the chain of command was rigid or flexible, but you've seen enough forced camaraderie to lean toward chaos with a side of hierarchy. You swing south instead, heading toward a line of trees in the far distance. Shelter, water, maybe even game, or if you're lucky, a friendly face who can trade you something that doesn't taste like a goat's foot. On the way, you stop to check one of your saddle pouches. Your sewing kit is missing. You curse softly. You probably dropped it last night, or it got snagged on a bush while you were half asleep. It's not the end of the world, but it means the tear in your under tunic will stay a tear for a while longer, which means more rubbing, which means more swearing. The little things really add up. Still, you've got most of what matters. Your fire kit, your knife, your saddle blanket, and a pouch with 3 sour plums that you're saving for an especially miserable day. Today isn't plum-worthy. Yet, you hit the tree line just as the sun dips low enough to start throwing shadows like long arms reaching across the plain. The trees are sparse but tall enough to hang things if needed: a kettle, a cloak, or a meat bag if you're lucky enough to catch something. You dismount and walk your horse beneath the boughs, letting it nibble at fallen leaves while you scan for signs of others. And there, etched into a low trunk, you spot a symbol. A knotwork pattern carved deep, familiar. It's not just decoration, it's a clan marker, not yours but not a rival either. More like distant cousins you only see at funerals and weddings, which means this might have been a resting spot, maybe a week ago, maybe longer. You check the ground and find old hoof prints, a crushed bottle gourd, and a string of broken beads that someone probably didn't mean to leave behind. You pocket them without thinking, part scavenger, part magpie. One day they might be useful, or pretty, or both. As the sky darkens, you debate a small fire. You settle on smoke-damp twigs in a shallow pit, just enough to warm some stones and heat your hands. You don't boil tea, no leaves left, but you do warm a bit of meat and eat it in slow, deliberate bites. Savoring every chew like you're at a royal banquet, it tastes exactly like all the others, which is to say, dry, smoky, and vaguely tragic. But hot food is hot food. You pull your coat tighter and lie down with your head on your saddlebag, one hand still resting on your bow. Your horse snorts nearby and you murmur, "You snore, I swear I'll trade you for a sheep." It doesn't reply, but you get the sense it's rolling its eyes in the dark. You fall asleep watching the sky through the trees, one star at a time blinking to life. You feel the earth under you, the cold starting to settle in your bones, and you know that tomorrow will bring more of the same. More riding, more watching, more steppe. But for now, there's nothing to do but listen to the wind in the branches and let your mind drift. And out here, that's as close to a lullaby as you'll ever get. You wake with a jolt, not from a sound, but from the sudden, inexplicable quiet. The kind of silence that makes the hairs rise on your arms as if the world itself has paused to listen for something. You stay perfectly still, breath shallow, eyes wide open in the half-light of dawn. Your horse is awake too, head up, ears twitching like little satellite dishes scanning the sky. Nothing moves, no birds, no wind, no hint of what woke you, but you trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this long. After a long minute, you rise slowly, stretching one leg at a time, joints crackling like firewood. You pack quickly, not rushed, but efficient. You've done this so many times, it's a dance now. Saddle, bundles, straps, reins, mount. You're moving west again. Away from the old clan marker, away from whatever that silence meant. Maybe nothing, maybe something. On the steppe, you never bet on nothing. The landscape shifts subtly as you travel. Hills roll a little taller, grass grows thinner, rocks scatter like forgotten dice across the dirt. You're entering a wilder patch now, a region not mapped or claimed, but still whispered about around campfires. Places where the wind plays tricks and travelers sometimes vanish like smoke. Not that you believe in ghost stories exactly, but you believe in caution and maybe a little in ghosts. As midday hits, the heat surprises you, sun bouncing off the pale grass like a mirror, sweat pooling at the base of your spine. You stop to rest under the meager shade of a wind-bent tree. You remove your outer coat, check your boots for wear, and run a quick inspection of your supplies. Everything's holding up, more or less. The leather on your water flask is cracking, but the stitching holds. You mentally note, oil it tonight. If you remember, if you aren't, say, dodging arrows, you gnaw on a bit of jerky, then spit out a gristle piece that's been testing your patience for days. You toss it into the grass, where it's immediately claimed by a curious crow. You stare at the bird as it hops away, prize in beak. That was probably the most decisive victory either of you will have all day. The terrain ahead sharpens, gullies carved by flash floods, craggy outcrops where only desperate shrubs cling to life. You spot a natural bridge of stone crossing a narrow ravine and decide to risk it. The drop isn't fatal, but it's enough to turn your week into a crawl home if your horse slips. You dismount and lead it across slowly, step by step. The wind howls through the gap like an old man mumbling secrets to himself. You make it across and don't look back. Not long after, you find signs of others. Not people, but animals, wild horses by the look of it. You pause to study the hoof prints, fresh, less than a day old. You catch a faint scent in the air, sweat, dust, something pungent and unmistakably. Equine, you urge your horse into a slow trot, hoping to catch a glimpse. Sure enough, just beyond the next ridge, you see them. A herd of about a dozen wild horses grazing near a shallow pool. Sleek, muscular, unbranded, you hold your breath, trying not to startle them. You watch the way they move, fluid, alert, entirely free. Your horse watches too, ears perked, body tense. For a moment, you feel a pang. A mix of envy and admiration. Those horses go where they want, eat what they find, run as far and fast as they can, answering to no one but the wind. You don't approach, you just sit there watching quietly, letting the moment stretch. Then, as if on cue, the herd lifts their heads and trots away, vanishing into a fold of the earth like ghosts. Gone without a sound, you exhale and move on, the memory tucked away like a shiny stone in your pouch of moments. Historians still argue whether Mongol herders actively released horses into the wild to strengthen bloodlines, or if such herds were just escapees from raids and chaos. Either way, they're part of the landscape now, as iconic as the yurts and bows and wind. By late afternoon, you come across something unusual, a circle of stones, not natural, not random. A fire pit clearly, but the layout is too careful, too deliberate. You dismount and examine it. Charred wood in the center, still faintly blackened despite days of wind. Beside it, a worn spoon and the delicate remains of a rice wrapper, not your usual steppe fare. Someone passed through here with access to better trade routes, or at least a cook who refused to eat like a goat. You leave the pit untouched but mark the spot in your memory. It's a sign you're on a subtle path, one used by traders, messengers, or smugglers. All three sometimes wore the same hat. Mongol courier networks called Yam were legendary, with relay stations and fresh horses spread across vast distances. But out here where the network thins, you're on your own. The light fades faster than you expect and you scramble to find shelter. You spot a shallow cave cut into the base of a limestone outcrop. It's just big enough for one person and a horse that really likes you. You coax your mount in, unpack only what you need, and settle in for another night of rock pillows and suspicious dreams. You strike a tiny flame, just enough to warm your hands and dry your socks. You pull a scrap of parchment from your pouch, not a map, just a scrawled list of places you mean to visit or avoid. You cross off one, you add another, plans change. Roads bend, you chew slowly on the last of your goat cheese, which tastes like regret and resilience. You save one tiny piece, press it into the crook of your belt. Tomorrow might be worse, or not. Hard to tell in this job. Your horse shifts beside you, nudging your arm with its head. Maybe trying to say, "Don't die overnight," in its own language. You nudge back. "Same to you, friend." The stars bloom again in the open sliver of sky visible from your cave mouth. Cold settles around your bones like a second cloak, and the steppe, that great empty hush, presses close once more. But you're still here, still warm, still moving, and sometimes that's everything. You wake before dawn again, this time not from nerves but from routine. The kind of deep muscle memory that shakes you awake before your thoughts even catch up. You sit up in the cave's narrow mouth, stretch your arms, and greet the horizon with a grunt that says both "still alive" and "my back hates me." The stars are starting to fade, and the first hint of pale gray creeps over the edge of the world. It's not sunrise yet, just the ghost of it, the promise before the delivery. You check your horse first, like always. Still there, thank the winds. Still chewing quietly, eyes half-lidded in that judgmental way only a horse can manage. You brush it down lightly with a rag wrapped around your hand. Not for comfort, well, maybe a little, but because a dusty, irritated horse is more likely to buck you off at exactly the wrong moment. Mongol cavalrymen knew that lesson well. A clean, content horse could make or break a skirmish. You think of those stories, scouts brushing their mounts while arrows flew overhead. Seems dramatic until you realize that horse was also their canteen, stove, bed, and getaway cart all in one. You break camp quickly. Nothing left behind but a few hoof prints and the ghost of your fire. And then it's back to the saddle, creaking leather, shifting weight, the familiar rhythm of hooves beating a path that doesn't really exist. You ride with the rising sun behind your back, letting it push your shadow forward as if reminding you to keep going. The landscape begins to change again. The grasses are sparser now, giving way to low scrub and dry soil. You pass stands of wormwood and wild onion. The smell sharp enough to wake your brain fully. A rabbit darts across the trail and you don't even flinch. You're not hunting today, not unless something volunteers. Your mind drifts instead to water. Your skin feels tight, your lips cracked. You check your flask, half full but not enough for 2 more days of this. By late morning, you find your salvation. A stream narrow and quick, cutting through the earth like a silver seam. You drop to your knees and drink straight from it, ignoring the chill and the odd taste of iron. Your horse follows suit, plunging its muzzle in with the desperation of a poet denied metaphor for a week. You both drink more than you should, and you both feel a little better after. You take the time to refill your flasks, splash your face, and rinse your socks. They smell like a war crime, but now at least they smell like a clean one. You stretch your back, massage your calves, and snack on a handful of pine nuts you forgot you had. You savor them like they're candy. Each one a burst of buttery crunch that reminds you food doesn't have to be punishment. Nearby, you find something strange. A stone idol worn down to the suggestion of a face half buried in the riverbank. It's got eyes barely and a mouth shaped like a question mark. You stare at it for a long moment. You don't recognize the style, not Mongol, not Turkic, maybe older, maybe just a rock pretending to be important. Still, you nod to it before you leave. Can't hurt. Steppe etiquette again, always show a little respect, just in case the rocks are watching. You ride on and spot the remains of an old felt tent, collapsed, overgrown, but still holding its shape like a ghost trying to sit down. You dismount and poke through it gently. Inside you find scraps of blue cloth, a rusted buckle, a crushed cup made of horn. You leave it untouched. There's something sacred about a tent no longer standing. Like it's still waiting for its people to return, even if they've been gone for years or centuries. The wind picks up and brings with it the smell of rain. Faint like a memory from someone else's dream. You scan the horizon and see clouds beginning to gather, low and dark and promising trouble. You cluck to your horse and speed up, heading toward a distant rock formation that might, if you squint and hope hard enough, offer some cover. You make it just in time. The first drops hit as you duck beneath an overhang, tossing your saddle down and pulling your coat tight. The rain comes fast, hard and cold, turning dust to mud in minutes. You watch the steppe transform. Every rut fills with water. Every slope becomes a trickle. It's beautiful in a brutal kind of way, cleansing but not gentle. You huddle beneath your rock, sharing the space with a family of spiders who seem equally annoyed by your presence. One crawls across your knee and you flick it off gently, whispering an apology. No sense making enemies among the locals. As the rain pours, you take the opportunity to check your gear. You sharpen your knife, rewrap the handle of your bow, and finally oil that cracked water flask like you promised yourself days ago. You even mend the seam on your tunic with a spare thread, using the tip of your knife like a needle. It's not pretty, but it'll hold. Mongol horsemen were notorious for patching their gear mid-ride, sometimes even sewing a saddlebag while galloping, though that might be one of those tales that got exaggerated along the way. You think about those exaggerated tales often, the ones about warriors who could sleep standing up, hit a bird mid-flight, drink the blood of their horse without missing a beat. Historians still argue whether those stories were literal or metaphorical or both. You've never seen anyone drink horse blood without gagging, but then again, maybe that's just you. The rain slows, then stops as suddenly as it started. The world is quiet again, but now it smells of wet earth, crushed leaves, and something cleaner than you've smelled in days. You pack up, wet sleeves and all, and mount your horse again. You're soaked, cold, and suddenly aware of how badly you'd like a bath, or at least a bucket, or a particularly judgmental cloud. Still, you ride on. The steppe stretches ahead, glistening now as if someone's polished every blade of grass. You pass a herd of gazelle at a distance, small bodies with legs like reeds and eyes that seem too wise for their size. They watch you pass, then bound away like wind-given form. You smile, just a little. By evening, you find a stand of trees clustered like gossiping old women, and you decide it's camp for the night. You hang your socks, build a small fire with dry kindling from under your coat, and warm your hands again. You heat a thin broth made from crushed herbs, jerky scraps, and a single, tiny garlic clove you forgot was in your pouch. It tastes like soup's poorer cousin. But it's warm, and that's what counts. You lie down, arms folded behind your head, staring up through the branches. A light breeze rustles the leaves, whispering secrets that might be for you or not. Doesn't matter. You listen anyway. You think about how much ground you've covered and how little that means out here. There are no milestones, no markers, only memory. You remember the idol, the collapsed tent, the rain, the rabbit you didn't shoot, the plums you still haven't eaten. All of it adds up to something, maybe not a story, but something. And out here sometimes, that's enough to fall asleep smiling. By the time dawn nudges your eyelids open again, your socks are dry, your breath curls in the morning chill, and the fire's last ember has gone to ash. You sit up slowly, groaning like a door with opinions. You're not sore in any one place anymore, you're sore in the shape of yourself. You roll your shoulders, stretch your legs, and then swing them beneath you, the grass damp and cool against your calloused feet. You know this is your final day before you're due to loop back. 1 week on the steppe. 1 week pretending to be a Mongol horseman, or perhaps now just being one. The difference is starting to blur. Your movements are automatic now. Fire, brush, pack, check the hooves, check the straps, check the horizon. The day ahead looks uneventful, flat, cloudless, and wide. But out here, that's usually a lie. You start riding without a word. Just the rhythmic creak of leather, the flap of your coat, and the familiar click of your horse's shoes tapping the earth. You pass more gopher holes than you can count, each one a potential disaster if you're not careful. A wrong step could shatter a leg, yours or the horse's. Mongol horsemen feared that more than enemies sometimes. A busted mount was more than an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. But today, your horse is sure-footed. Maybe it smells the stable ahead. Maybe it's just being generous. You reach down mid-ride and adjust your saddle cloth, noticing a sharp bit of twig that's been jabbing you for hours. You flick it away with exaggerated disdain because no matter how romantic the life of a nomad seems, nobody ever talks about the twig in the butt cheek problem. Major oversight. As the sun climbs higher, so does the heat. The morning cool burns off, replaced by a dry warmth that crawls up your back and down your sleeves. Your water's holding out, and so is your mood. The saddle doesn't feel like a torture device today. It just feels like a seat. A dusty, sweaty, creaky, occasionally slippery seat. Progress. Your path takes you near a small trading post, one of those semi-permanent clusters of tents and carts that dots the edge of the horizon like a hiccup in the grass. It's not much, but it smells like smoke and human voices. You veer toward it, even though you don't need to buy anything. You're craving the sound of language, even if it's just bartering and cursing. You dismount and lead your horse through the edge of the post. A boy is roasting goat meat on a stick over a stone fire. You hand him a twist of wool yarn in exchange for a skewer. He gives you a look like you've overpaid, then grins and tosses in a second stick. You eat it with your teeth and fingers, grease running down your hand. It's the best thing you've tasted in 7 days, and probably still only a 6 out of 10. You overhear 2 older men arguing over a piece of amber. One insists it's dragon bile hardened in the sun, the other says it's just fossilized tree spit. Historians still argue whether Mongol traders genuinely believed in these magical origins or just said so to upcharge their neighbors. You smile and keep walking. You don't need to know the truth. Sometimes a good story is worth more than the object it's wrapped around. Past the main camp. You stop at a prayer mound, a little ovu made of stones, bones, and rags. You circle it 3 times as tradition demands and leave behind a smooth pebble you picked up days ago. You don't say anything aloud, but your thoughts hum a quiet chant. A thank you, a request for continued luck, and a hope that the rain will hold off until you get home. You mount up again and keep moving. The sun's higher now, but the wind rises with it, making the air bearable. Your coat flaps like a banner behind you, and you lean into the ride a little more. No urgency. Just momentum, like the land wants you to finish what you started. By midday, you spot vultures circling ahead. You squint, a carcass. No, it's too small. You ride closer and find a broken cart, split axle, spilled cargo, and a pile of sun-bleached bones beside it. Human, not quite. Goat. You check for signs of struggle. Nothing recent, just abandonment. The bones have been picked clean by wind, not teeth. You dismount, peer into the remains, and find a tiny wooden charm wedged under the wheel, a carved wolf head with black stone eyes. You pocket it without thinking. It feels like it should come with you. Back in the saddle, you find your pace slowing, not out of fatigue but reflection. Every sound is sharper. Every blade of grass seems to shimmer more. You're not just riding, you're noticing. You remember the rhythm of hoofbeats from day one when they sounded like threats. Now they're a lullaby. A soft percussion that lulls your thoughts into stories. You pass another hill and spot a marmot standing upright, watching you like a tiny sentry. It chirps once and disappears. You consider chirping back but decide against it. Some social lines shouldn't be crossed. A little further, you find old arrows embedded in a tree trunk, 3 of them weathered and snapped. You stop and examine them. Feather fletching, bone tips, probably used for training, not war. Mongol children started archery as soon as they could walk, some even before that, using miniature bows while strapped to their mothers' backs. You imagine a boy practicing here, scolded by a grandfather who probably missed more shots than he admitted. You pull 1 arrow free and leave the others. 1 for memory, 2 for whoever comes next. You crest a ridge late in the day and see the plains you started from. Far off, barely visible, is the cluster of yurts where your journey began. The horses, the smoke trails, the flags fluttering on long poles. You're almost there, but you pause. Not because you're tired, but because you're not quite ready to stop. You dismount one last time on the hilltop and sit in the grass. You let the wind comb your hair, tug your sleeves, and rattle the contents of your pack. You eat the last of your dried plums, still wrinkly, still absurdly delicious. You watch the light stretch across the grasslands like a golden sigh. You think about all the tiny things you packed and how many of them turned out to matter, and how many didn't. You think about the old idol in the riverbank, the cracked bowl, the way your horse snorted when you sang to it. You wonder what you'll remember a year from now or 10. Eventually you rise, brush yourself off, pat your horse, and ride the last stretch home with a full stomach and a slightly fuller heart. You're not racing anymore, you're arriving. And you realize, not for the first time, that sometimes packing light is the heaviest kind of freedom. You cross the final stretch of plain as the sky turns the soft gold of a weary candle. The air smells like dust and summer smoke, and the edges of everything, grass, shadow, even time, start to blur just a little. You've been out here long enough that the idea of walls seems strange again. The thought of a roof overhead feels a bit overbearing, but there it is ahead of you now, a cluster of yurts flanked by wooden carts and tethered horses. Flags flapping lazily in the wind like tired prayers. Your horse slows before you ask it to, sensing the finish line. You lean forward and pat its neck, whispering something meaningless but warm. It's earned every oat and every rub-down it's about to get, so have you if we're being honest. As you near the encampment, a small boy spots you and runs ahead to tell the others. You hear his shout carried on the breeze, something about a returning warrior. That's a stretch, but you'll take it. The people here don't swarm you exactly, but they do gather like steam, quiet, curious, and warm. A few nods. One old woman hands you a bowl of fermented mare's milk before you've even dismounted. You accept it like it's a medal. The drink is sour, a little fizzy, and not exactly refreshing, but it hits the belly like a song you forgot you liked. You drink half, then wipe your mouth with your sleeve and smile. That's enough for now. You lead your horse to the communal pen and untack it slowly. Every buckle feels familiar. Every strap now has a story. A scar on the saddle reminds you of that windy night with the fire that wouldn't light. The tear in the pack cloth, that was the day you fought off a crow with a ladle. You tie your horse gently, brush down its side with one of the stiff brushes hanging from a peg, and whisper thanks again. There's no ceremony. No music, but the quiet attention you give this moment feels like its own kind of sacred. You're offered food: stew, flatbread, roasted onions, and something you think might be rabbit but decide not to confirm. You eat with the others around a central fire. Nobody asks where you went or why or what you saw. They assume correctly that you've seen wind and hooves and ghosts and time itself folded in the creases of a travel-worn blanket. They nod as you chew. That's enough storytelling for now. You sit back, rubbing your hands together, and realize your fingers are still stained with campfire soot and horse oil. And you don't mind. You could wash them, but you're in no hurry. Someone pulls out a morin kuur, the horsehead fiddle, and begins to play. The music is slow and haunting, like wind learning how to sing. You lean back against a saddlebag and let the sound carry you. The melody is old, older than most countries, older than your own family name. Mongol horsemen were known not just for warfare, but for this music, this moment. Their lullabies could settle even the wildest foal or the most restless soul. Historians still argue whether these instruments evolved from Chinese models or developed independently out here, strung from the silence of the steppes. You don't care which theory is right, you just know it works. As the night deepens, you pull your blanket tighter and watch sparks rise into the dark. You remember your first night out, the nerves, the aches, the doubts. You remember thinking you'd never sleep, never adjust, never stop checking over your shoulder. But you did, you adjusted, you learned to. Listen, to wait, to notice the language of wind and hoof and silence. Your pack now sits beside you, worn and lighter than when you left. Some things are missing, used, lost, traded. Other things remain untouched. That little wooden charm you found at the abandoned cart, you've tied it to the strap. It dangles gently in the firelight, its carved wolf face catching glints of orange and shadow. You reach in and check your supplies, more out of habit than necessity. The dried meat's gone. The pine resin still rattles in its jar. Your sewing needle is bent at the tip, and your water skin smells like the inside of a mossy barrel. But every item tells you a little story now. You've stopped seeing them as objects, their memories folded into fiber and hide. One of the older men leans toward you and asks quietly what you carried for luck. You pause. Then pull out the shard of arrow you found in that cracked tree. You offer it to him without a word. He takes it, turns it in his hand, nods, and hands it back. No questions, no lessons, just understanding. Eventually the fire dwindles and people start to drift away. You stay a little longer, your legs stretched out, your eyes half closed. You feel the exhaustion in your bones now, but it's the good kind. The kind that tells you you've earned something. You're invited to sleep in a guest yurt, and you accept. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of wool and earth. You remove your boots, your coat, your sash, laying them with reverence beside your bedroll. You crawl in, wrapping yourself in a woolen blanket that smells faintly of sheep and smoke. It feels absurdly luxurious. As you lie back and let your breathing slow, you realize something. The packing wasn't just about gear, it was about preparedness, mindset, trust. You packed for the body, but you carried something deeper for the spirit. And now, as your eyes close, the line between the two dissolves. Outside, the horses shift and snort. The night wind runs fingers through the grass. Somewhere a marmot chirps into the dark, probably complaining again. But it doesn't matter, you're safe, you're home or something like it, and in your dreams you're already back in the saddle. The morning doesn't arrive so much as seep in. Light filters through the felt seams of the yurt, soft and golden, like tea steeping into cloth. You lie still for a long moment, not because you're tired, but because you've forgotten what it feels like to wake under a roof. Your body doesn't quite trust it. but your spine stretches luxuriously, your toes wiggle inside woolen socks that somehow survive the entire journey, and you take your first deep breath of the day, smoke-tinged, earthy, warm. You rise slowly, dressing piece by piece, tracing every item with your fingers like you're reacquainting yourself with old friends. Your coat smells like horses and sky. Your belt is slightly frayed but still firm. You lace your boots last, knowing that once they're tied, the day begins in earnest. You step outside and the sun greets you like an old co-conspirator. No fanfare, no trumpets, just brightness and quiet. The camp is already alive. Horses are being watered, firewood chopped, pots stirred. You nod to a woman carrying a stack of folded felt, and she nods back, no words needed. You're part of the rhythm now. Your horse spots you and whinnies low just once. You walk over and scratch behind its ears. There's no ride planned today, no mission, no route, but it stands ready all the same, as if to say, if you're up for it, so am I. You feed it a dried plum from your pocket. It pretends to hate it, then crunches it smugly. You spend the morning doing what Mongol horsemen did in their rare downtime, repairing, sharpening, adjusting. You lay your saddle out on a flat rock and check every strap. You reinforce a fraying edge with wax sinew and a stitch you swear you invented but probably didn't. You replace a cracked buckle with one traded from the camp blacksmith, an older man with soot on his cheeks and a silent laugh. He doesn't charge you, just shrugs like it was already yours. You refill your water pouch from a leather cistern and take a deep drink. Somehow, the water tastes like smoke, too. Or maybe you've just been breathing it for too long. You sit down next to the fire pit where yesterday's stew pot still hangs, crusted with last night's success. You scrape a bit from the side and pop it into your mouth. Cold, chewy, but familiar, like a memory you can chew on. In the afternoon, a young rider invites you to join him for a practice shoot. You agree, even though your fingers are sore and your aim is questionable at best. You mount up with practiced ease and ride out to a nearby clearing dotted with wooden targets. He fires in a graceful rhythm, draw, release, hit. Draw, release, hit. You draw, release, and well, you don't hit but you look good doing it. That counts for something. You switch horses mid-run just like the Mongol messengers once did during the Yam system. Historians still debate how many horses each rider managed in a single day. Some say 5, others claim as many as 20. You're struggling with just 2, but it's exhilarating, the wind in your coat, the thrum of speed under your legs, the sheer absurdity of trusting 2,000 pounds of muscle with your fragile little body. Later, you and the young rider lie on your backs in the grass, pointing out clouds that look like warriors, sheep, and one surprisingly accurate dumpling. You learn he's training for a local Nodam festival, part race, part pageant, part chaos. He asks if you'll stay to watch it. You don't answer right away, because the truth is you're torn, you've become part of the rhythm here. But you weren't born into it, you're a traveler, a visitor in borrowed boots. Yet the steppe doesn't seem to mind, it's absorbed you without question, made space without ceremony. Out here, identity is less about titles and more about what you can carry, how well you can listen, and whether you return what you borrow, including kindness. That evening, as the sun pours molten gold over the plains, the camp gathers again for supper. This time you help cook, you stir the pot. Taste the broth, add more salt than strictly necessary. You're told it's perfect, you suspect they're being polite, but the laughter and the steam and the way everyone leans toward the center makes you feel like you've done something right. You share stories, not heroic ones, just strange little moments from your journey. The time your tent collapsed on you mid-snore, the incident with the saddle that flipped and deposited you like a sack of beets, the failed attempt at singing to a marmot. The group laughs in the warm, sleepy way of people who have seen worse. One woman tells you a tale about a sheep that once stole her boot and led her on a 5-mile chase. Another swears she saw a steppe ghost riding bareback under the full moon. It turns out most of them have ghost stories. That's comforting in a weird way. You go to bed later that night with the kind of tired that feels full, not hollow. You've done nothing dramatic today. No storm, no bandit, no spiritual revelation. But everything felt real, rooted, whole. You lie in the dark of the yurt, tracing the ridges of your calluses with one thumb. Tomorrow you'll start to pack for real, repacking the same objects, but somehow they won't weigh the same. The threadbare tunic, the bone needle, the jar of pine resin, none of it changed, but you did, and even though you'll leave, a part of you will stay behind. In the dust, the stories, the songs, the laughter, and the wind-shaped quiet, that's the secret of the steppe. You think you're just visiting. But it keeps a bit of you, like a good pack, it knows how to hold what matters. The day of your departure rises quiet and blue. There's no dramatic send-off, no horn blast, no ceremonial gift exchange or long-winded speeches under fluttering banners. Just the sound of hooves shifting in dry grass, leather creaking as you cinch your saddle, and a few quiet nods from those you shared fire and food with. The steppe doesn't beg you to stay, and it doesn't hurry you off either. It just waits, patient, expansive, and utterly unmoved by sentiment. You tighten your saddlebag straps with fingers that now move automatically. One last check. The pine resin is there, the water skin full, the worn tunic rolled and tucked tight beneath the spare bowstring. You press your palm to the bag, almost like saying goodbye to a friend, or maybe like tucking a letter into a box you'll never open again. A few faces gather as you mount up. Not to see you off exactly, more like to witness, because anyone who leaves the steppe isn't just going somewhere else. They're carrying a piece of it with them. You give a small wave, a few return it. One child offers you a crust of bread like a relic. You accept it, bowing low as if it's made of gold. It tastes like dust and sun and something very close to love. Your horse knows the way, even though there's no trail, no signs, no destination carved in stone. You ride low in the saddle, letting the wind press your coat back, your eyes scanning that endless horizon one last time. There's no mistaking it, you've changed. Not in a dramatic, prophecy-fulfilling kind of way, but in the quiet way people change when they've listened closely, watched carefully, and packed wisely. You retrace old paths, and every landmark hits a little different now. That stand of crooked trees where your fire sputtered and refused to catch feels like an inside joke now. The ridge where you camped high to avoid mosquitoes but invited a thunderstorm instead, still majestic, still humbling. You remember how you once viewed this landscape as threatening, as harsh and unknowable, but now it feels like an old teacher, gruff, generous, and full of uncomfortable truths. There's one last stop before civilization reclaims you, a dry well near a weathered post. You dismount and tie your horse to the remains of an old cart axle. You kneel and run your hands along the edge of the well's cracked stones. According to legend, a Mongol warrior once filled this well with horse blood in a last act of defiance during a siege. Historians still argue whether it was myth, metaphor, or misreported heroism, but the story clings to the air like dust. You drop a stone into the shaft and wait, no sound, just silence stretching down forever. You unpack one last item, a sliver of deer antler you picked up days ago. Not valuable, not useful, just something about the shape called to you. You tie it with a thin strand of horsehair and leave it on the well's edge, a quiet offering, a final weight you choose not to carry home. By afternoon, the edges of the grasslands begin to dissolve into farmland, then fences, then vague suggestions of roads. You pass a trader hauling a creaking wagon of salted fish. He nods. You nod, that's enough. You stop at a roadside station where the smell of meat on the fire makes your stomach clench in gratitude. You eat without ceremony, chewing like a soldier, thinking like a monk. At the edge of the nearest town, the buildings rise awkwardly like animals learning to stand. Your eyes scan for things they didn't used to see. Where's the wind coming from? How's that horse tethered? What's in that pack? Why is it riding high on the left? You've learned to read the world through movement and weight, through the shape of bundles and the scuff on boots. You stable your horse grudgingly and remove your pack for the last time. You carry it like an extension of your spine, into the inn, up the creaking stairs, to the bed that looks frankly way too soft. You set the pack down on the wooden floor with the reverence most people save for holy relics. Then you sit beside it, staring, quiet. The room feels smaller than the yurt, heavier somehow. You open the window and let the breeze in, not the same breeze, but close enough. You unpack slowly, not because you need anything, just to mark the end. Each item a memory. The bone needle, the sun-bleached scarf, the scrap of hide with the horse brand etched into it, the broken buckle you meant to replace but didn't. You lay them out on the floor like pages from a journal no one will ever read. The last thing you pull out is the wooden charm with the carved wolf face. It's smoothed by wind and handling now. You hold it in your palm for a long time. Then without thinking too hard, you hang it on the wall by your bed. It belongs here now, or you do. Or maybe you both don't. Outside, the town begins to quiet as evening settles. You lie on the bed, eyes open, breathing shallow, and for a moment, just one brief flickering moment, you hear it again. The wind through the grass, the steady thump of hooves, the low hum of fire crackling in a copper pan. It's not memory, not exactly, it's something else. The steppe doesn't let go, and neither do you. The story fades now, soft as worn felt, slow as smoke curling from a low fire. You're lying in a place far from the open sky, but some part of you still feels it. the endlessness of the grass, the rhythm of hooves that lull you into something deeper than rest. A knowing, maybe, a quiet agreement between you and the wild that shaped you. Close your eyes now. Picture that final fire you sat beside, sparks lifting toward a sky so wide it doesn't seem real. Around you, shadows of people whose names you never needed to know because their stories spoke louder. You hear the soft scrape of bowls being stacked, the coals settling into sleep. Someone's humming off-key but kind. Your pack lies beside you again, not full of things but of moments. A cracked spoon that once stirred ashen broth. A shard of arrow wood from a tree that didn't fall. Every piece carries weight, but it's not heavy anymore. You've learned what to hold and what to let go. The wind slips through the seams of memory. Your horse moves somewhere beyond the edge of sound. Maybe in your dreams tonight it'll find you again, galloping across plains that stretch farther than your waking thoughts can follow. Breathe deep. Inhale the dust and the silence and the distant laughter of a campfire far behind you. Let it fill you just long enough to remind you were there. You traveled light but came home full. Now let your breath slow. Let your muscles soften. There is no ride tomorrow, no fire to light, no water to haul. You've done enough for now. The steppe is still there, waiting, patient as always, but for tonight you're here and that's more than enough. So drift, gentle rider, drift with the rhythm of hooves and dreams. Let the pack settle beside you. Let the night carry you far. Good night.